Okay, it's episode 10 of Incoming Aggression. And now that we've had the LPL Final, you know, finally, Froskurinn, you've been vindicated. We can just tell everyone, like, go and watch the LPL Final. You know, it's as good as any of the OGN finals ever were. You know, it was one of the best games in the history of League of Legends. This was the pinnacle. This was China at its most competitive season with all these great Chinese, Korean players in the league. And so this must have been the best of five ever played. I mean, I'm sure that's what you're about to tell me and how you feel about it. You know, you feel like the whole region's been vindicated and they really do know how to play the game, right?
I don't think it was the best final that's ever been played, but it was certainly very entertaining, and I think it was... There is some truth that I think it was one of the strongest showings from China in a final.
Okay, that's a bold statement, because I'll give you a spoiler right now. When I did Summoning Insight with Monty, which I'm not sure the timeline of, but I think this will come up before, he actually wasn't that impressed by the final, for reasons you can probably tell. Like, for example, the fact that EDG won it, and yet they actually looked so in danger of losing it in nearly every game. Even the games they won, some of them, they had the times where LGD might have won, had plays they could have made to win, or had to make a weird mistake. What do you think of this description? Does this match up with you at all? Did you see it differently?
I do think...
Remember, it's perfectly okay to disagree with Monty. I do it on a daily basis, you know, so feel free if necessary.
I don't understand Monty's logic all the time, but I do think that if you're coming from that angle, there is a viable argument to be made that a lot of these games hinged on one rotational error or a mistake that an enemy team made and then it was just capitalized on, as opposed to both teams just playing utmost perfect and one team just outplayed the other one, primarily around Baron throws, because... I think the short and sweet answer of what happened is that LGD had superior early game shot calling and rotations, and EDG had superior late game macro decision and shot calling. And when LG did find a win in the late game, it was because EDG made a mistake right before a Baron, and Baron for both of these teams was absolutely devastating in how it destroyed each other's bases, which, I mean, that sounds like a fairly obvious thing to say, like, you know, win the game, kill the Nexus. But there's something very unique about how destructive Baron is in the hands of LGD and EDG just because of their rotations and their minion control.
Okay, let me just check. You did just say that it's LGD who had, like, the early game, they were the stronger tactically, and EDG was the later game tactically. So, okay, let's start on those grounds there, because here's the thing. Another Monty statement that I wanted to check against your kind of rubric of how you see the game is that Monty said that to him this final was the team that was the better tactically, which he was counting as
LGD?
EDG.
What?
Okay. Let me just check. I think this is correct. He was saying overall, because remember, to Monty, late game tactics probably trump early game tactics.
Okay.
I'm trying to fit your two worldviews together. So he had EDG as the better tactical team, but he had LGD as the team where I think, okay, one thing he said was that they were much better at drafting, and then I forget what the other one was. He had another thing that they were better at. Better at team fighting, I think, maybe. Did I get this the wrong way around?
I would hope so.
Maybe he said LGD were the... maybe LGD were the tactical and the drafting one, and the EDG was the better team fighting one. I think that might be the way around it. He had it okay. So the notion there, in some senses, fits in with what you're saying now, because obviously the later the game gets, the more it becomes predicated on team fighting, and if you have the better team fighting, you're going to be able to make better use of advantages. You're going to be able to come back in the games you're losing. That's always a great power to have. Okay, there's a lot of the great teams in history, League of Legends. That's what they've relied on, is that if they had super good team fighting, they could always get back into a game. You know, Cloud9, Moscow 5, Frost, all these different teams that could do this. How do you see it in that sense? Like, he's saying that to him, LGD had way better drafting and they had actually better tactics overall. What do you think of this?
I think that there is a lot of truth to that. LGD, pretty much in every single early game, they had a very clear plan, which was to camp the shit out of Pawn, and it was successful in quite a few of their games, which is why they were able to get a lot of victories, because they would find snowballs there. But it just felt like every single early game, LGD were always in control. They got the initial skirmishes off, they got the initial ganks, they were getting the initial dragons, they would make picks, transition into barons when they were finding victories. But late game, whenever EDG were able to kind of stall out into the mid game, LGD would look for these picks around important objectives like Baron, like Dragon, and instead of finding one person on EDG, they would suddenly find 5. And then team fights would just immediately get turned around. It was just these superior Gnar ultimates and Sejuani ultimates out of Clear 11 Koro, which, I mean, obviously sounds super biased coming from me because I'm the Chinese fan, but Koro and Clear Love have a massive highlight reel for this entire series for how hard they carried EDG some of these games.
I'll just, for the moment, I won't touch that. I'll just mentally put that in a box and put it away for later. That's going to be like a treat for later. That's like a hot apple pie. I'm letting it cool down a bit on the windowsill, in this Arizona breeze or whatever. I don't even know anything about America. I'm making all this shit up. So what I'm going to ask you about now, though, is, here's the thing. When we came into this series, one of the reasons EDG was so highly hyped, I remember a lot of people, you yourself, were saying they were the best team in the world. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why people said they were the best in the world is that they didn't have a lot of the problems that you would have expected when you looked at this lineup initially. So think of the old EDG. They were more of a late game team. They didn't take a lot of the risks early on, primarily because some of the teams they were facing in the Chinese region, that was where their strengths lay, and you didn't want to fight teams at certain points in the game, and you wanted to get to your advantages in scaling, or just team fighting because you had Name before. Add into the mix Deft, and he comes from the same world. He comes from the world where he's used to being behind sometimes for Samsung Blue versus the top teams, but battling back and using the advantages late game with great team fighting. So when you add these together, you'd expect EDG to be like that. Now, it sounds like you're kind of conceding, like eventually they did kind of become that sort of team. But here's the thing. What made them be so hyped is this aspect during the season of like, no, now they've got the complete package, now they've got the early game dominance as well. Now the Deft's really awesome in laning phase now, and actually early in the game, remember this famous thing, Froskurinn? The reason you can't ever like camp Deft and stuff is because if you ever go into the enemy jungle, you don't meet one guy, you meet three guys. It's like Koro's there, Clear Love's there, Maiko's there, and you're like, oh my god, 1v3, and then they're like, yeah, no, we kill you, man. Like, I know you don't actually talk in a male accent like that, but that's what I'm assigning you for this particular discussion, okay? So that didn't happen in this final? Why didn't that play out anymore?
There were pieces of it, and it definitely did show its head where they were able to do that. For sure, EDG was not playing at the skill ceiling that they had showed during the regular season. This was not the best that we'd ever seen EDG. That said, LGD were, of course, playing above and beyond anything that they had ever shown in the LPL season. Obviously, they were doing a good job hiding their true strategies and tanking themselves to make sure that they got the proper seed into the playoff bracket. But it was two things: EDG not quite performing up to what was expected, and LGD overperforming past what we'd ever seen from them.
After seeing this final, I actually feel like this will sound strange, because bearing in mind LGD really could have been champions in this particular series, the way it played out. I still feel like we never fully got to see how good LGD was. Now, that might sound like a crazy statement, because they 3-0'd two people in a row, including OMG, and then Snake, who'd been like... So on one hand, all the veterans who were the legends of LPL, and then in the next series, all the rising stars who you think could be the next ones, So that seems like the ideal ones for them to be en route to then facing the final boss, But I actually feel like the way the tournament went, unfortunately, because they matched up so well against EDG and could have even won the series, it's going to be too easy to be like, oh, they were easily the second best team and no one else was close to them except EDG was slightly better and LGD was this good. I feel like if the bracket had gone almost any other way, we would have gotten a better sense for how good LGD was. Because if LGD plays either IG or VG, we get to see a different style from them. They can't just play the exact same style they played against OMG and Snake. We'd have to see something different out of them. I think we'd have a better sense of how good they are, because I actually feel like the guys who probably got the most fucked by the overall draw was actually IG in the end, because they just looked like total shit because they got really beaten up by EDG, who kind of had a great matchup against them. Meanwhile, I'd have loved to see if it was IG against LGD in the other side. I think that would have been... What do you think on this topic? Like, was LGD the clear-cut second best team in LPL?
We went into this when we were first doing Incoming Aggression. We talked about how Vici and Invictus Gaming should have been like the really big, exciting playoff match. Obviously, Vici shit the bed, weren't able to come up, but IG and LGD, that would have been something fairly interesting. I think IG and LGD are interesting teams because they're the merriment between strategy and team fighting, and I think like IG has a little bit of an edge on LGD as far as team fighting, and LGD has a little bit of an edge on IG as far as strategy. So I do think there's truth to your statement in saying that both teams would have had to shift things up to stylistically match up against each other.
See, what viewers need to know here is that part of the reason why you shouldn't be harsh on Froskurinn is because, okay, if someone had gone through like a whole education in mathematics, they'd done a degree course, masters, they become a doctor of mathematics, then if they made a small error, even in like a simple calculation, you'd be like, well, how can that be? You're supposed to have done all this formal education. You should know all the levels of it, But if you heard some of these amazing stories, like there's these stories about genius people, okay, like where like an Indian guy who doesn't speak any English just finds a textbook of maths, and he's never been taught in school, but because he's like a savant, a genius, he just reads the book and suddenly he can do like extremely good mathematical problems, and he can kind of decipher them, and then you're like, wow, what a genius. Like, you have to kind of take the aspect that he might not have some of the more refined components, but there might be something to it. There might be something behind that, okay? So when you think about Froskurinn, okay, and she says something like merriment, which actually isn't a word in the English language, you have to realize she's like that Indian guy there, right? She was just locked away in her room, like dreaming of a better world of anime and well, I won't even go there, but other things, other pleasures and sensual aspects of the world, dreaming of that life and piecing it together for herself from television, from books, and then eventually we let her out in the world, and not only now does she seem like she's actually a social person, she's kind of groomed her appearance, etc., but she's also even managed to teach herself about Chinese League of Legends without knowing any Chinese, so actually, we've got to celebrate what's good about Froskurinn. Don't focus on her saying stuff like merriment, like it's obviously like marrying in that particular case, so, the marrying of skill and tactics. So I'm just here to kind of give the context of Froskurinn. That's what part of this show's about, so that we can all enjoy her kind of like getting to the deeper mathematical questions. Okay, Froskurinn, it's just a bit of context for you there. Is that okay?
No, you're good.
Okay.
I was one of those kids that I read a lot as a small child, and so I always mispronounce words as well, just because there's a lot of words that I've never said out loud.
No, that's actually a common problem, is that if you just read a word, you have to decide in the moment of reading it how it's pronounced, and then when it comes to actually saying it out loud, maybe you get it wrong at times. Not all of us were like theatrically trained as a boy like Monty or whatever the fuck went on in his life,
He's got vocal technique and training, warms up before cast.
Some of us just came from the hood and now we're here, that's our life story. Mm-hmm. So don't hate us because you hate us. Now, in terms of this final, you were describing that, okay, LGD, like IG, is kind of like the marrying of skill with tactics.
Yes.
In this actual final, did LGD play to their max level?
I think of the players that they had, yes. I think Imp had a fantastic final. I think Wayless has room for improvement and growth, although he's definitely stepped up in the back half of his split just in his own personal growth. Chwin, and I know that I bully and I pick on him just because he's easy, but it was a massive problem. If you look at EDG's draft phase going into this, I think it's easy to say that LGD, if you're just looking at power picks and things like that and compositions collectively, that LGD definitely had stronger compositions and had a stronger draft phase. But EDG had a very particular style coming into their draft, and it was about targeting Chwin. I think 3 or maybe even 4 of the 5 games, Nunu and Sejuani were either banned or picked away, but technically it's just denying those 2 tank champions from Chwin, and they'd give him a power pick like Rek'Sai, which looked fantastic in LGD's composition, while EDG are picking things like Corki in today's meta. But they'd still find victory there just because they understood that if we nail this guy on their weakness, that he's the weakest point, if we limit his champion pool and make sure that they have to protect him, that we can get an advantage here.
In terms of matchups in this final, I want to start with the marquee matchup is the AD carries. Deft versus Imp, and obviously Deft, I think many people would have him as the MVP of the season anyway. He was like the standout player in LPL, but Imp's been very good in his own right, and now obviously he's bested a couple of the other good AD carries in the playoffs to get to this point, and then they have the history of going against each other so many times in Korea. So obviously it was a natural matchup there. In this particular series, you're just saying Imp had a great series. It's fair to say Deft did get the better of him in this series, just individual player, right? He was outperformed by Deft. You don't agree?
It's really hard. Deft had some amazing plays, like, don't get me wrong. But the thing about Deft's plays is I feel like they were really dependent on him working well with his team, which pretty much fits perfectly to Deft's MO if you think about it. Like, he's the team fight AD carry. It's about using what's in front of him, the zone control, and he can just go insane and do those crazy things. I mean, he had a pentakill in this series. But Imp, if you watch his Jinx game, I think it was game 3, just some of the snipes that he was making and his positioning, his wave control, the fact that he was on such an immobile champion, I don't know. Deft Imp has a good team around him. Like LG and EDG, they both have really strong members, and they're one of the few teams where they can match up pretty evenly across the board. But I don't think that Imp has as many resources given to him personally by his team that Deft does to make use of it. But obviously, those are two different styles.
Okay, I agree with that, but here's the thing that I found interesting. I actually feel like because it was a direct marquee matchup, and it seemed like both teams had a lot of focus on like what AD carry is going to be picked for the opponent, what are we going to pick? That seemed to be a big focus of the drafting phase. It felt to me like Imp actually kind of got the short end of the stick in this particular series, as in like a lot of the advantage in that sense went over to Deft, because you're talking about his Jinx play here. Well, basically Imp was forced onto Jinx a lot of the time to pick it away from Deft, and also all the EDG guys did then is like, right, well, we'll just ban Kalista all the time because we know that's the super sick champion for Imp, So I feel like, within the context of what he got to play and what he had to play against, Imp did about as good as he could hope to, but I also feel like he naturally couldn't have outperformed Deft in this. Like, I think that's why, to me, Deft outperformed him, because Deft could at least always get onto champions he wanted, and aside from playing the odd, like, dog shit fucking Urgot game, which everyone does at the moment, by the way, he still had some way better games.
Yeah, he got to play Corki, got to play Severe. Imp was forced as a denial. It was Clearlove was sacrificed to deny Chwin, and Imp was sacrificed to deny Deft.
Didn't you also think that, okay, in game 5, normally, I've mentioned this on Summoning Insight as well, normally, the reason why really good AD carries hate Sivir is because to them, it feels
like it doesn't do damage.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of if you're a carry top laner, you don't want to play a tank, okay? Because you think, well, I can't do damage, and also I can't carry the game, But actually, just as a really godlike top lane carry, if he really did get the perfect game on one of those champions, like even Maokai or something, well, we see at the moment, people like Smeb, etc., can be gods on these champions, and they can carry the whole game. It felt like that. This was like the ultimate game if you were trying to convince some really good AD carry to sometimes play Sivir, because he actually, first of all, did do the damage, and did get the kills, and did carry the game on it in this game 5. What do you think?
He had an amazing Severe performance. Again, though, the thing about EDG and how they work as a team is, and just naturally Deft's style, is that it was Clearlove and Koro that would leave the way. If you think about that pentakill play in itself, a lot of people want to talk about Pawn and Deft. Deft had fantastic positioning. He makes a super aggressive flash. He just stands right in front of the enemy's face. He knows exactly how much damage that he's going to be able to do, that he can get the pentakill. Of course, Pawn flashes forward to find the gold card on Imp, but then it's immediately cleansed. But no one's talking about Koro and Clearlove, who effectively stalled out that fight long enough for Pawn A to get back into position because he ports terribly into that team fight, but also allow Deft to walk over there and have the front line of the tank where he's able to do as much damage as he does. He gets off like 15 autos. That's a really long team fight to just be standing and auto attacking from one place as the AD carry, and his tank line was fantastic.
Oh, don't worry, Froskurinn. It's not lost on me at all. The delicious irony of you repeatedly talking about Clearlove, but as using him as a resource that someone else has, that even when they do really well, means that, their performance shouldn't be overplayed in any sort of sense, delicious. Oh, it tastes so sweet. I wonder why I like that flavour so much. Oh, let's look at what brand it is on this bottle here. Thorin's own brand. Oh, interesting. I didn't know a few bottles of this had gotten out there. You must have taken them from the larder when I wasn't paying attention, Have you been enjoying this particular? I know to you it's quite bitter, to drink, but I find it quite soothing. It's a tonic. It's a little pick-me-up, if anything. What do you think on this topic? Expand what you're saying here. How did Clearlove help Deft, the best player in all of LPL, carry the games?
Man, out of all of these flavors, Thorin, you choose salty.
Yeah.
Okay. This series for Clearlove, because let's just hype up Clearlove. A, he gets a quadra kill. So yeah, Deft got a pentakill on Severe, but
B, he's worth versus one of the worst junglers in LPL.
Hey, he got a quadra, so he also had to
C, they're using all their bans on the other jungler. Yeah, okay, keep going.
Clearlove played really well. He made sure that he showed up, like we were talking about shadowing. What Clearlove does as a style, he's obviously a very passive jungler, naturally. He's a herbivore jungler. Yeah. But when people are ganking, when shit goes wrong, Clearlove shows up in the nick of time to save things. Koro had amazingly placed teleports. Koro's Gnar, I think it's at a 19-1 record, and it showed up massive in this series. In fact, rewatching it, Clearlove did well as far as making sure that where he needed to be when shit was going south for EDG and trying to turn fights on the back half, because initially every single skirmish looked like it was going to go in LGD's favor, and then a TP would come in or Clearlove would flash out of a bush, and then slowly they would get cleanup kills to even the score and transition it into some sort of objective, either like a dragon or a tower. Korov's Gnar, though, he got so many 5-man, 4-man, massive game-changing Gnar ultimates, and I think that was the first loss that he had on Gnar in this series. Like, typically when you face EDG, the Chinese casters, they say ban Gnar. Like, that's the only English that you could recognize when watching the Chinese cast is EDG is playing ban Gnar.
So I'm still with you on the Koro thing. We'll go to that in a second, okay? I won't forget. But on the Clearlove topic, now, when you say that, you know, he had a fantastic performance, he did. He was obviously the best jungler by far in this series. That wasn't even really debatable. And he had some... Overall, his average performance level was very high on all the champions pretty much. But saying that, when you consider who he was playing, if he was all you said he would be, this should have been on the level of like a prime Dandy versus Insect Worlds Final type performance, where not only are we banning out the champions the other guy's good at, we're picking his champions away from him, and then this guy's just much better, so it's a purely dominant performance. This to me was more of a supportive Clearlove performance. This was more of like a help the team approach aspect, you know. He couldn't really just dominate in terms of just jungler versus jungler.
I think he got both. A majority of it was a very supportive role, which is what Clearlove naturally plays, but he did get a Rek'Sai game as well, where he turns into that big, scary carry Clearlove, although he didn't get like his mad Lee Sin where he's like ganking every single lane. Because that's the ceiling cap that when we talk about EDG, how there's supposed to be that complete package of having the early game, the mid game, and the late game. Yeah. They only have the early game and the mid game when Clearlove's playing his carnivore style, which is very rare.
See, that's just the timing again. The old LOL gods. Why must they curse us? You know, because it turns out, you know, in the early part of the season, EDG had the complete package. You know, they were the best team in the world. They could dominate the early game. They could dominate the laning phase. They could dominate late game. They just weren't beatable in many senses. Clearlove was having the season of his career, hailed by some white people who are obsessed with China as like, well, one of the best junglers of all time. Absolutely sick. He was having crazy games on Lee Sin, on Nidalee, on everything pretty much. All the hardcore duelist warrior champions. He was showing that side to his game. But you know what? Just like EDG, suddenly that disappeared when it came to the playoffs, and they were narrowly getting through these fights, and it was on the traditional carries, and then they won with the late game style, you know, the original style of EDG. The same thing had to happen to Clearlove, you know. Suddenly, it was the old Clearlove back. Welcome back, Clearlove. The regular season's over. Come on in. We've got your usual seat prepared for you. Will you be needing a meal, sir? Oh yes, I'm very hungry today. Lots of farm for me, you know. I won't be I won't be making many. Okay, yeah.
Okay, this is the play style. So people will make fun of Clearlove. A lot of people saw him in his Worlds performance when he played fucking Sightstone Jarvan before that was actually a thing that people did, and they're like, what the fuck is he doing? Applying no pressure on the lane. He's just letting his lanes get destroyed and rolled over, and he's just clearing wards. Clearlove is a farm-based jungler most of the time, but so was someone like Meteos. Meteos was known for a while of farming the jungle very heavily, but he had strong laners, and so he was able to do that, and he would come out into these team fights, and he would be effectively a fifth man. Instead of having like the skimp jungler gold, because he had spent so much of his time farming and building himself up, their team fight was just that much more oppressive because they had a fully farmed fifth member on their team. And this is what Clearlove does. And if you think about EDG in 2014, when they were that big baby blue Samsung-esque style with the big 5v5, obviously it was super beneficial to have a jungler who would just farm himself. So when they came out to these team fights, and no one team fights better than Clearlove. Clearlove is amazing at team fighting. He's amazing at zone control. He's amazing at target priority. He's amazing at locking the correct amounts of CC.
So just to clarify, you're saying Clearlove team fights better than Dandy, better than Cacao?
I think he team fights on that level.
You just said no one does it better.
Okay.
You were like, no one does it better than Clearlove. Yeah.
Clearlove is one of the best team fighters in the world.
I
would have to look and
I've bargained you down to one of the best there. Okay, yeah, keep going.
I would have to isolate and really look at Cacao, Spirit, and Dandy.
We're still talking about junglers, yeah. We're still only talking about junglers. We're not just saying like one of the best team fighters in the world. But the fact that
people make fun of Clearlove's style when Meteos was known for the exact same thing, like this is what Clearlove's doing. You can't hail Meteos and then make fun of Clearlove when they do the same thing.
Is there really anyone who's an expert at League of Legends who hails Meteos as like a top 5 jungler of all time, top 20 player of all time? Do you actually know this person? Does this person exist, Froskurinn? Was that a wait a minute. Let me just go in. I know you. There's a shadow in the room. You're like, that person over there is dangerous. But now I come in the room, I turn the light on, and I walk up. Wait a minute, this isn't even a person. This is a straw man. What is all this? This isn't even. It was just a shadow on the wall. I order. Like, who hails Meteos as some god of jungling?
Not just. Okay.
Try again. Reset. Breathe. Try again.
Clear Love. Clear Love style. He's
just got a great pair of tits, hasn't he? They're just incredible. Yeah.
He's the best at it. Yeah. Okay, there we go. That's how I'll end it. He's the best at what he does.
Here's the thing, Froskurinn. Clear Love is like Kate Upton. Okay, Kate Upton. People who really like Kate Upton. I mean, I know because I actually am subscribed to Reddit/r/Kate Upton just to get all those pics. Now, people who go on this.
Kate Upton.
You don't know who Kate Upton is?
I need to
listen, if you love tits, later on, just Google images Kate Upton. You're going to have a whale of a time. She's like someone just who has amazing tits, right?
She does all the pictures indeed have very large breasts.
So here's the thing, Froskurinn. I'm glad I'm just educating you completely about culture and everything, right? Anyway, so here's the thing. When you go on the Reddit for her, the whole point of being there, right? If you like Kate Upton, should be like, right, well, I'm here to see pictures of her tits. Like, that's the whole purpose of being here, right?
Oh, yeah,
no.
Face.
That's the problem. There's people who go on there, and their comments, because they really like Kate Upton, is like, oh my god, she's so beautiful. Like, oh wow, look at her ass. Like, look at her figure. Like, her figure's shit. She has like huge hips. She doesn't particularly have like a great ass. She's not like a bikini model or something, you know. She's just got amazing tits. She's got that aspect, you know. She's got one extremely great quality, and the rest is either good, slightly above average, or just average or okay. So as a result, you don't need to oversell it. Just focus on the tits. Explain what great tits they are. You don't have to go on and like lie and be like, oh, you know, her ass is great, but you're just, you know, you get distracted by the tits being too good, so you don't notice that the waist, you know, is quite good. And I prefer natural women anyway. You know, I don't like these like thin supermodels. And that. You don't have to put any of that bullshit in. Okay, she's just got great tits, but don't go too far. Now, your problem here is when you're talking about Clear Love, you get defensive again. Like, we're focusing. You're doing a great job of describing all his great qualities, his strengths, where he can be great. But then it's like you're in denial. Essentially, you acknowledge that he has great tits, but you're in denial that anyone can have a better ass or that it's necessary to have a great ass as well. And I'm just telling you that, like, Dandy or Cacao are someone with a great pair of tits, but a slamming ass as well. They're toned, they're in shape, and you know what? They can be in. They can be in candid pics and they're looking great. They can be in modelling shots and they're looking beautiful.
Response, Dandy please. Has a better ass than Clear Love.
Yeah, exactly.
And he also has a nice rack.
That's all we needed to say from the beginning, you know. But anyway, yeah, bookmark that. You can have fun with that later. So
you should really check the image that I linked you.
I'll check it later, but listen, don't worry, Froskurinn. I've seen almost every picture of Kate Upton in appalling detail. I say appalling. Quite lovely detail, actually, much like your pink hair. Now then, back on topic. So we were talking about Clear Love there. You kept trying to bring in, as usual, this is how you know that you've spent a lot of time around Kelsey Moser.
Oh, God.
Somehow, even when someone's not talking about Korra 1, you keep like pulling out the old crowbar. I've got to get him in there somehow. Because, like, I feel like, okay, here's the problem. Here's the analogy for you, Froskurinn. I think that on some level, Kelsey actually relates to Korra 1 as a person. She feels like she is Korra 1 because she's developed from these humble beginnings. She's been the guy who she's not a guy, but you know what I mean. I'm referencing Korra 1 here. She's been the guy who never was going to be the best. He was never going to be like the star, never going to be the main person, but she's gotten a solid skill set together. She's become really good at what she does. And then she's expanded into these other areas that maybe initially you're uncomfortable, like trying to be a carry top laner, you know, but he's having success and it's working out and he's becoming better and better. But because of the circumstances of not being that bigger personality, that flashier playing style, people are never going to reference you as like the best or whatever. Even when you are, even maybe in your role, the best, people are never going to reference you in that way. So I feel like she relates to this in some way, and she's always trying to give Korra that little one-up, give him that little bit of spotlight, you know, reference why he's so good. So if we're going to talk about Korra 1 in this series, are you ready for the statement that you're going to love right now? Are you ready for this?
I just have to... Am I Clear Love in this analogy then?
Yeah, you have a great pair of tits.
Okay.
So in this, but you have flaws, and I acknowledge those flaws for scoring. You don't always, your ass is like not that great. You don't know that much about the West. You know, you figure it's okay, but you know you could work on it a bit more. You've got a great, nice hair now. You've improved that area a bit, like Clearlove improving a bit of this ganking and all that sort of thing. You know, a bit of the warrior style thing. But okay, but as I was going to say, when we're talking about Koro 1, in his particular scenario, it's going to be easy to say, like you have here, like, oh, you know, he was awesome in this series. He totally carried. He did amazing stuff. But remember, whenever you talk about the top laner for Froskurinn, or at least whenever you talk to Thorin about the top laner,
oh wow,
it's really not a 1v1 lane. It's a 2v2 lane. There's a jungler there, and if that jungler is shit, then it's hard to be really good. And so, you know what? Are you ready for the bold statement?
Yep.
I think that in this series, ready, drum roll, in this series, Acorn was as good, if not slightly better than Koro 1. Come at me, bro. Come, bring me the salt mine. Bring it to me, Froskurinn. Bring it.
Hello? Okay.
Hello.
Acorn played very well. I will say this. He even got a Hecarim game. I was very impressed with his Onslaught of Shadows. I don't think it was shy level Hecarim, but it was a good Hecarim.
His Hecarim's been great all playoffs. Okay, that's his main carry champion that he developed. You know, out of the support, not the supportive star. I think his Hecarim's been very good.
The moment where I was like, his Hecarim was good, and then I changed to it was really good was, I can't remember what game it was, but I'll never forget this ultimate. He was fighting, and I think it was when Kog'Maw or Deft was playing Kog'Maw. Deft like zones in. They're fighting over Dragon. Deft zones in on Acorn, and he just starts pushing him out because he gets the range advantage, and Acorn's like fucked. But he has his Onslaught of Shadows available. So you're like, is he just going to Onslaught of Shadows backwards and just escape and save his life? Nope. He goes over the wall between the blue buff and the banana brush, and he times it perfectly. So not only does he escape from Deft's range and kind of pull Deft, the AD carry, doing all this massive damage away from the team fight that's going on, but he onslaughts his fear, his ultimate hits and pushes back two members of EDG that are chasing down on Wayless and team. So he saves his life. He zones the enemy team, and then he flashes out of it or fucking runs and charges away, and then fucking Wayless shows up and destroys EDG with a well-played shockwave. And everyone's sitting there like, oh my god, Imp was so amazing. You know, he was just sitting in the back, he was throwing down his AoE rockets because he was playing Jinx, and Oriana had a nice shockwave, and EDG just got funneled into all of this AoE. But the reason EDG got funneled into it is because of a perfectly placed ultimate from Acorn. So I will agree, Acorn played amazing in certain aspects, but Koro's Gnar play probably hinged in one EDG games just on their own, and I don't think Acorn carried that hard for this set.
Okay, so like, give me more on the Koro side. What did he do that was so exceptional?
His teleports were flawless. Acorn had good teleports as well, but it was almost like Looper-esque teleports. Like the perfect counter teleport came down every single time. And when we talk about how...
Yep.
Oh, here we go, because we got to shit on Looper now. When we talk about how EDG, LGD...
No, I just find it interesting that much like in the Looper situation, you instantly credit sick teleports of a top laner to the top laner.
Know?
It's weird how when someone else was telling Looper when to press F, somehow he just couldn't press it. You know, it's like it was off on timing, or he didn't know if to press it. Or
to be fair, Koro's the captain of the team, and he also helps secondary shot calling. I don't know, because obviously I'm unable to say like Koro was making the decision to teleport right there, but he was on point.
Right, okay, fair enough.
What was it? Oh, okay. So we talk about how LGD, they would initially win all of these team fights, and then EDG would find these cleanup kills and kind of turn games. It's always like LGD's winning, and then there's just this moment where LGD overstay or they overcommit, and then suddenly again, like those three Chinese players or those three EDG members coming out of the bush and cleaning up and making those chase kills, which allowed EDG to get back into games and to win this series. And that was always on Koro. Koro was always one of those players that would have the chase or the counter teleport or the counter Gnar ultimate. I don't think I ever saw him miss a Gnar ult or not hit at least 3 or 4 people.
Here's what I found strange about this series is that I actually do buy into Monty's assessment that as strange as it is that LGD lost the series, they were the team who had the chance to win nearly every game. Like actually, the really shocking game for me was game 1, because in this game, this might have been the biggest...
Or they just steamrolled.
Biggest stomp of the whole series was actually LGD beating up EDG in that game 1, and Deft was on fucking Kog'Maw, so you would have thought, and Koro was on Gnar, Nunu for Clearlove. This should have been like ideal champions for these guys.
The big flaw of that game was where EDG got caught. And they got caught right in front of the Baron pit. And when LGD got the Baron, because their wave manipulation is so good, they just devastated. Like, that's what I love. We're talking about like all of these skirmishes and the counter teleports, but what this series really came down to was Barons and how efficiently both of these teams use Baron. I don't think Baron is used better by any Chinese team than EDG and LGD. So it was like really awesome to watch. And EDG, this is leftover mentality from 2014. Their philosophy of the game was don't lose lane, don't lose Baron. And that was it. They were very much like a Baron-based late game 5v5 style of team. And this still carries over. Now they do it even earlier. They've had early Barons like 21 minutes or something like that. Of course, Nunu is in their rotation of junglers. But LGD as well, just because Acorn and Wayless and how they control side waves and how they constantly are prepping waves and making sure that they always have a pressure point on the map. When they do get that Baron, it just means so much more.
Now, we talked about, like, we've gone through nearly all the matchups here, but there's a key one we're leaving out here, and I purposely left it to last, which is the mid lane matchup. Because as I kind of... Here's the problem, is that when we set up this final, I picked Pawn to me as, like, the major X factor for the whole series. Because I thought to myself, if Pawn really outclasses Wayless, then to me, LGD didn't have a chance to win the series. Because I know Deft can at least go even with Imp, and I know, like, the top lane's probably going to wash if it's Acorn versus Koro. So, you know, there's a lot of factors here, and because of the meta, unfortunately, I knew it's very unlikely Clearlove would be able to just... It's not like they're going to be playing Warrior Champions. He's not going to be able to just duel Schwen all the time, just kick his head in. So it's mainly going to be on the mid lane. And I thought for both sides this could tip it, because if Pawn really was exceptional, and if he was doing any of the shit he was doing in the other, like the semi-finals, just solo killing Wayless, then that's game over right there. And then beyond that, that also opens up a similar door for Wayless, where if he like neutralizes Pawn or plays really, really well, then he can kind of be like the hero himself. I have to say, when I actually look at this final, I feel a little bit vindicated in being one of the Pawn critics, where I'm not a critic in the sense that I don't think he's a great player. I think actually this season impressed me, and I thought it was a step up in terms of having more carry potential and being more of a primary reason your team wins. But the way it ended also did kind of show me what Pawn is about, because everyone will always look at the series where Pawn does really well. So think of the semi-finals I just referenced there, where he really did beat up Rookie, literally solo killed him, shit on him in a bunch of matchups, beat him in like reverse matchups, did everything that like you could do to kind of humiliate a mid laner 1v1, much as Pawn did in the past to Faker. But I've always referenced this. The big problem was how you could know people only watched the Faker series when they watched Pawn's career is that if they'd have watched the other series against players who aren't as good as Faker, you'd see that sometimes Pawn didn't even outclass them. Sometimes he was just as good, or even sometimes didn't even do as well. So in this scenario here, put Pawn against Wayless, and we can talk about Wayless' side of it in a second, but in theory, if Pawn's really as good as kind of like the billing is for his top level, this should be a series he should be able to dominate, and he should be able to dominate this matchup, win out a lot. What do you think? How was Pawn in this final for you?
Pawn did his job with the resources that he was given. I think that's especially clear when you look at his Twisted Fate, the very last game when he pretty much got bodied countlessly. It was very clear that LGD's plan were to camp Pawn. He was ganked repeatedly by multiple members of the team. Sometimes he found mixed success. He had a decent Jace game. I think he might have played a different champion throughout the entire series as well. I think he had Kassadin, Fizz, Jace.
He played Lulu, and then he played Jace, and then he played Kassadin, and then he played Fizz, and then finally he played Twisted Fit. So you're right, he played 5 different champions.
Sometimes he did counterpick himself into an unfavorable matchup and got punished for it. But my biggest issue and like my criticism against Pawn and kind of like my own personal vendetta, because I agree with you, I do think that Pawn is a very good player. I think he's actually performing better in China than he did previously. I think that he is a fundamental role to identifying EDG's new play style and how they work around the early game, but I do not think that Pawn is the carry of EDG, and I feel vindicated by this series because I feel like that was proven, because Pawn was bodied and EDG still won, and they won about who I thought were the true carries, which is Deft and Clearlove.
Like, the problem is, on the other side of the equation, it actually turned out neither case was really the issue. Because that's the thing, it's not that Wayless, it went the other way and Wayless just stomped him. It's more like, in general, Wayless kind of just neutralized him, like, didn't get beaten up by him, had a few games where he was really good. Obviously, Wayless had a sick Orianna in game 4, that was like a standout one particularly. But it was more that Pawn couldn't do stuff to Wayless, and Wayless just kind of like played the way Wayless normally does. Like, I think it was between the two of them, there wasn't that much difference. Like, no one was super effective for either team, I don't think, for the mid lane. What do you think?
No, I agree with that. I don't think one was clearly a standout. In fact, in a 1v1, if Pawn A wasn't getting ganked or had as many ganks and as many resources to use that Wayless got, and B wasn't in a terrible matchup sometimes, that Pawn should have solo killed Wayless. Wayless has never been known for his lane 1v1 strength. It's all about his team fight and his ability to impact his team and how he positions and how he moves around team fights.
What did you think, speaking of all the different picks of Pawn, what did you think of his pick of Fizz in said game 4, the one where Wayless is Orianna, which is his classic pick? Just went nuts and killed everyone, basically.
I don't know why he
AP Fizz at that, by the way. We're back in the AP Fizz days, guys.
I don't know why he picked Fizz. What I found...
I mean, he did it in the semi-finals, all remember?
But what I found weird, and obviously it's just like a comfort champion for him, and he performed better in the semi-final. He had like a sick flash and some really crazy plays on the semi-final for his Fizz, but his Fizz in this series was really underwhelming. Was the Jace ban too. That was the two things that really confused me. Was the Fizz pick, the Twisted Fate pick also caught me completely blindsided. But the Jace ban. So he played Jace and then he plays Fizz. And then like the next game they banned Jace instead of banning Jace like immediately after he had shown, which I thought was super weird from LGD. I couldn't figure that one out at all.
Because I actually find Pawn to be a bit... That's why I love the fact that we have more and more best of fives, because you get so much information from best of fives. Because one of the key things you get from a best of five is you get to really know, like, when someone's down in games...
What they go back to?
Yeah, what are they comfortable on? What are they willing to risk on, etc.
This is Fizz, this is Orianna?
No, I think it's more like if I had to categorize Pawn... Here's the thing, because he's so good on so many champions... People want to be like, right, well, that's why he's one of the best mid laners ever. Like, maybe, you know, he's right up there with the Fakers and Dardays of the world because, you know, look at the champion pool he has. He can play all these things. But actually, he's another one of those guys where the first thing I always look at when someone plays a lot of champions is why might they be playing a lot of champions? Is it that they are exceptional at all these champions and they're just the god to like a Faker who could literally just counter pick you on anything they want and win, okay? Mm-hmm. I actually think in Pawn's case, it's more that he, in a weird way, he's kind of cheesing in a way because he's picking champs that people don't play that much now and that you won't have played recently. So Jace, for example, or playing Kassadin into certain matchups that most people wouldn't play him into because of the problems you're going to have early game. Or a Fizz, obviously, because no one plays that right now. I think that part of his strength, actually, is kind of counterintuitive. It's that when he plays some of these champions, I always think of this with his Kassadin, where the whole point of most people's Kassadin is like, right, play as safe as I can, farm up a whole shit ton, then I'm going to get super late. Like, you know, late is when I'm going to be scary when I have my rod stacked. Instead, Pawn will like actually be really aggressive with his Kassadin early, even in laning phase, try and create kills, try and roam, try and do all sorts, and it's almost like, because it's a counterintuitive playing style, it's like he finds a little edge. But that's the thing, when you have that style, if he really was just the Kassadin god, he could pick it like 3 games out of 5 in the series, assuming it's not banned, which it wasn't in some of the games he didn't pick it. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe it was actually. But the point is, you could just stick with it. Essentially, if you're a god, there's a reason why they tend to main a couple of champions. Because they're so unbeatable on those champions that there's no reason to pick anything else. So I think part of the reason why he picks them, but only tends to pick them for 1 game, and even if he does well on it, go away from it next game, is because it's kind of like a surprise aspect in this sense. Like he's just trying to get a tiny edge on you in whatever it is, laning phase or a certain period of the game where normally he wouldn't have one. It's like a fly on my screen that I've been trying to kill for like 5 minutes. Anyway, it's gone. I can't get it for Froskurinn. Much like Clella, I can't nail down what makes him so good. Anyway, can you carry on from this point I was making?
It sounds like, and of course you're gonna roll your eyes. It sounds like he's almost like Zatai in that sense. And that here's the thing. I think those 2 players would be a really good analogy between each other, because neither of them was the god carry who just carried the whole game, but they would both have incredibly explosive games, and their whole thing was they would always have out-of-meta picks, which they played as comfort champions. Think about how weird that is. It's not just that it's a comfort champion and it's like vaguely in meta, so I guess you can sort of have it, because it would be second rotation, but you can have it like now if you really want it. They play champions that aren't even used anymore. Who else is playing AP Fizz mid now? Especially in the finals.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the thing. That's also
game of the finals.
I also think that's kind of telling in a weird way, though, you know, because it actually kind of shows that Like, it's very unlikely the guy really would just be like experimenting with this if it was something that was just like one of 10 champions that he could all play. I think in that scenario, he feels like that's something he has to try and do, you know.
No, I think that you bring up a really interesting point. Glad that I got to talk about Zatai.
Yeah, another crowbar. That's your Koro 1. See, that's how you think of yourself, Froskurinn, because your whole thing, Froskurinn. Here's the analogy for you, okay?
Okay.
Whereas Kelsey's like the quiet, like Koro 1 guy, is just like making his name, establishing himself, and he's doing good work, and eventually he's being slightly recognised, but not entirely. And he's expanding out, trying to become, find his own voice, become his own carry, become the carry within himself, As he's trying to do that, your scenario, Froskurinn, is you can't be... Listen, you're not ever going to be the best colour commentator in the world. Probably not. Maybe you can try, maybe you can be very good, but there's others out there who they're ahead of you, or they've got certain qualities. Yeah, male genitalia helps for a start off. They've got certain things that, at least I hope, you can't currently acquire. Now, going beyond, transphobe, oh my god, so how disgraceful, whatever, anyway. So, keep going. So... There's certain things you can't acquire in that sense. You probably can't be the best writer. I mean, for a start off, you're not even the best writer in that room currently. And that's not even about me, by the way. I was a joke to Kelsey there. You probably can't be the best analyst in the game or thinker, all these areas. But your key quality is much like your hero Zatai. You're just trying to be the one who's the jack of all the trades. You want to be able to do a bit of colour commentary, be good at it, and have your own unique style. You want to be the guy who does articles and has your own voice. You want to do videos and have your own perspective. So much like Zatai and Porn, you're trying to abuse the mastery of multiple areas, even if you're not the best ever at one aspect, What do you think of this?
I'll take it. I'll be the Zatai.
Okay.
I hear he's actually maybe going to retire. And now let's just think about that, Thorin.
Now, why would he do that after wasting our time playing in the fucking top lane for all this split? Why would he do that?
I don't know. Because he's a very wealthy kid who gets bored.
Oh, my favorite kind.
But this is the thing. Zatai is a veteran of the seed. He's one of the last remaining... Royal Guard of the Invictus. We're finally going to have a World Elite. I forget which tournament, but there's going to be a World Elite Invictus Gaming Final. I think IG actually won this morning on it for the IET tournament. And the last time that these two teams faced, of course, they were completely different rosters, and it was really big for their brand. But Zatai is one of the remaining, and Kid as well. Kiddies is kind of left over. From that old Royal Guard. That's ancient history as far as League of Legends is concerned, but he's only 17. If he was in North America and Europe, he would just now be playing his first competitive split.
Well, he would only just now be allowed by Riot to play in LCS after his entire career, in which he's had a billion LAN tournaments, proved himself really well, and now is going to retire after I am old. Interesting how that works, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Please don't retire.
Yeah, I don't really give two fucks, quite frankly.
Come on.
So, it's not even playing mid lane anymore. Why are you getting so hyped?
Because I just love him. I love how crazy he is. Yeah. And I think he adapted. How many times is a roster, or a role swap actually a good idea? And how many times does it actually work out? No, he wasn't the best top laner, but poor Zatai is fucking facing down Acorn, Flame, going.
Listen, you just take out Zatai there, take out all those names and make the analogy to what I just said, and that's why I love Froskurinn, okay, because she's not the best at any one of these areas, but how many times has someone made a transition from one area to another, different scenes and stuff, and it's been successful? She's trying to face down Jat and Monty and Deficio and all these guys. She's not even actually a guy. She's role swapped into the male world, so girl power. That's why I don't want Froskurinn to retire. I agree. Oh wait, it was about Zatai. Yeah, my bad. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, back to this final. Does this final... Listen, MSI is still over a week away, so we can do an episode before that where we talk about MSI specifically and do predictions and stuff. But just looking ahead from this, was it clear-cut that EDG is the best Chinese team?
This is really close. I think it could have gone either way. LGD... And, okay... First and foremost, you're totally going to call me out and say you're trying to wiggle away from this and save your ass and cover your bases. Let me make this statement. We do have a Lord bet, and EDG have won. So my end of the Lord bet is still valid, that EDG is going to win MSI.
Here's a great comment for you, is that you don't know this. Maybe you haven't seen this on the Insight episode, but I've got 2 active Lord bets around MSI, right? Because I've bet Monty that GE Tigers will beat SKT. So once Monty calls me Lord, that will make way for you to call me Lord for Spirit.
So these two things can go in and finish it? Okay.
These 2 things will happen, and there will literally be a day, it will be the day of MSI, the final, when I will simultaneously be in lordship of you, Doublelift, and Monty. Now that's a hell of a trio right there. That's the Illuminati. That's the trifecta right there, Froskurinn.
Okay. Now, I still believe in EDG. My Lord bet still stands.
Okay.
I want them to win. I believe that they're going to win. I believe that they're going to be the best team at MSI. In the current form that we just saw, LGD versus EDG, so in the finals form, I actually think that stylistically, LGD would do better on the international stage than EDG. I think EDG won this series because stylistically they were a good matchup and how they were playing to beat LGD, to upset them, because I think Monty's right. LGD, it should have been their series. They had pretty much every single game at the beginning of the game, the advantage to win and to close it out, but they made mistakes that EDG just capitalized on. And I say that because LGD is the smarter team. They're the more what I would consider tactical team as far as their early game rotations are considered. And I think that would do better like across the board against Koreans, against Western teams, things like that, versus being a very skirmish team fight oriented team.
See, on one level, I can see why you say that, okay? Like, for example, one thing that would help LGD out is that whoever he faces from Korea, whether it's GE Tigers or Lee's the jungler of that team, or Tom/Bengi, whichever they put in for SKT, none of them are really strong junglers right now. At best, Bengi's kind of doing his own, like, Schwen impression himself, which is on these tanky junglers. He's just doing a good job and doing what he can, you know. None of these are star junglers, so you're not going to be shown up in that position there. So in terms of the other positions, yeah, LGD has some decent matchups at least. But I actually still think EDG would do better against those teams than LGD would, because first of all, when I think of all the top laners they're going to face, I actually think that Koro would do. I think he, because of his like hybrid role, he would do well against the others. I think he would do well against all these guys. He would have like a good matchup against nearly all of them. I mean, Smeb from GE, if he wants to play a carry style, is a better top laner, I think. But that's about it. I mean, if it's Marin, I think Marin's pretty inconsistent actually, and sometimes he actually does fail on certain champions, you know. Yeah, I actually think EDG overall, especially because to me, EDG having Deft, that's the real help there. Because if you go against SKT or against GE Tigers, they've got two really good AD carries. That does make sense actually. I mean, let me think. If you are LGD and EDG, you both have really good AD carries. So GE Tigers, okay, Prey is really good within his team, but okay, I'll acknowledge I think Deft's better than him at the moment. Imp, they're just different styles. I'm not sure who's better there. I don't think Bang's better, but he's a good supportive style of AD carry. So I think Deft would be the clear favourite among all those AD carries there. So that's an edge you could have. Meanwhile, if you're EDG going against SKT, well then you know that your mid laner, I mean, admittedly it's Pawn, so maybe you can do some magic again. Probably isn't going to be better than Faker. So that's where I'd worry for LGD, is how is Wayless going to do against Faker? And what can Wayless play against Faker? And what can he ban out against? That's where my concern is, what happens mid lane. And that's where they would have issues.
Schwen and Wayless would never be able to beat either Tom or Faker, or Bengi and Faker.
And by the way, you do know what Faker's winningest champion ever is, right?
LeBlanc?
No, that's the champion he has a perfect win rate on, but the champion he has the most wins on in history.
Is it Orianna?
Yeah. So anytime he wants, he can just take that away from Wayless and be like, oh, and by the way, I play it better than you. Remember? And then meanwhile, Shi Young is in the crowd like, he does as well. He did that to me once. I still have nightmares about it. Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But he could also do the same thing to Pawn with the LeBlanc. He could be like, hey, Pawn, you like LeBlanc? Leave that open, motherfucker. Let me play that. Because think about it. Pawn's used to people always banning LeBlanc against him. They don't want to have any part of that, but Faker will fuck you up if you give him LeBlanc. We've learned this.
And the Chinese would fuck that up. They'd leave LeBlanc open.
Why not? Why not? You know. Anyway, going forwards, let me think. Okay, I've got a question to ask about the scene in general. So there was just this IET tournament, which didn't have LGD and it didn't have EDG, because obviously they just played the final.
Had LGD.
Oh, it did, but they played earlier? Oh, that's right. Yeah, they played and lost to IG, right? Again, see, that's why it would have been interesting if they'd played in the semi-finals or something in LPL, because they lost a bunch of best of 5 to them now. What do you actually make of tournaments like that? Because obviously I think it's great that you have extra LAN tournaments and that teams are playing each other. But I always think you guys on China Talk go too far in trying to downplay them as like, oh, you know, like no one really cares about them. They just kind of play them and like well, that's what a lot of old school LAN tournaments are like. You just turned up on the day, you didn't have specific practice, and you just played people in a row, and it was more kind of like whose form is better, if you know what I mean. It's not that you don't care and you're not trying. It's more like on that day without any prep, who wins this best of 5 or whatever, you know. What do you think?
That's an interesting way to look at it, and I think there is truth that we do downplay it just because there is kind of a history of playing with subs, like we saw with ONG when they entered IET, they picked up 2 different subs. It's a little bit more playful because they're technically online tournaments, so they're not even using their TR clients and accounts, so they don't have everything available. So I don't know if that hurts their competition or what would be available and if they would practice certain strategies. It definitely.
Wait a minute. When you say what's available, you mean like some of them don't own all the champions?
Sometimes shit like that
so
comes
like,
up because they're playing on the online
I haven't bought in
tournament.
Italy. I can't play it.
I can't.
Okay.
It depends on the third party event. IET, the I stands for international, but as you can see, it's not actually an international event. I believe it's also hosted by the Chinese government.
Okay. I think that's only in League of Legends, though. And by the way, part of that's probably thanks to Doritos, you know, that company that make the potato chips. Like, in some way, they're involved in League of Legends. You know, I think they in some way stop teams from other regions going. You know, because actually, there's actually a long history in China. First of all, every tournament in China tries to do it like that. Every tournament in Asia, okay, so Korea or China has to name itself like International Federation of Esports, like it's all some shit like that, as always, like the World Championship, you know. But in the past, they did used to have tournaments where it would never be totally international like a Worlds, but usually they'd have a couple of teams come in, you know, and part of it was like trying to make more international flavour. So in Counter-Strike, we used to have tournaments in China, which were primarily Chinese, but they'd invite 1 or 2 foreign teams, or they'd invite 3 or 4, you know. So I imagine if it was a more open circuit, you know, a bit freer, free at last, freedom. If there's more freedom out there, then I think that they probably would have Western teams.
That we would see a Western
or Koreans
team
at least,
or a Korean team.
or at least like a second team Korean team. You know, let KT go because they're not in OG anymore. You know, it'd be that sort of a scenario. Because that's the other thing that used to happen in China as well that I don't particularly like about the segregation of the regions is that even when the Western region was a bit distanced from Asia used to have all these inter tournaments, and like I mentioned here,
Wars League.
Well, that's like the best one because that was online. But I mean, they have smaller lands where you'd have a team like MVP White back when they used to be. Well, yeah, they were called White at the time. And you'd have a team like MVP White where it was just Imp and without all the good players. And because they were a tier 2 team, they would go to this LAN in China and they would try and play like whatever Invictus Gaming or, you know, these sort of like the secondary team WE IROX. So you'd have sort of like a lesser talent, but it would still be interesting because it was international flavour. And you know, some of these players will become stars one day. Mm-hmm. How would you describe like the current setup? Because you were describing there like it's an IET tournament, but obviously it didn't really have any international teams there.
Didn't have any international teams. I'm actually really curious now that if there wasn't contract limitations by the other surrounding leagues for the other regions, if the invitation would have been extended to Western and Korean teams. I know that there's been crossover tournaments before. I think there was one at the end of last year where there was a Korean, or maybe it was the beginning of this year, where there was a Korean-Chinese tournament.
You mean the one where the team that became GE Tigers now went there and lost, right?
And they had like the top Korean and Chinese team, or like
when they went there when they were Huya Tigers, right?
Yeah. But I don't know. As far as IET, I don't think it's the best run tournament, but it's certainly entertaining. I think it was kind of also poorly timed, the fact that it happened right after finals and playoffs, that some players, I mean, obviously you're having subs because also there's contract issues. People are talking about roster changes, but people are also going back to Korea, back on vacation. Okay,
just to wrap up that Chinese topic, for that whole thing you just told me, that whole speech about, no, the Lord bet's totally on, like I'm totally into it still, man.
We're going.
But I'm just saying that like LGD would have probably done better against these Chinese teams. Like, boo! Boo! Lame. You suck. That's lame. Like you're just building in the excuses already. Like
I know that. I knew you were gonna take that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. No. Lord bet's on. GE Tigers versus EDG. EDG beat GE Tigers. That was our Lord bet.
Exactly. I mean, I think we said win, but that's because in our world, those are the two teams, obviously, that will be in the final. But we'll just say beat, okay. It has to be in the best of 5, though. It can't just be like best of 1 or whatever that is.
Have they released the format for MSI?
I believe, I don't think they have, but I think it's something like either best of 1 or like double round robin best of 1 into a top 4 play semi-finals and a final or something like that. And so I assume it's best of 5 semis and finals. So in theory, we should get to see them play since we think they're going to be the 2 best teams there. Shocking. Wait a minute. TSM? They aren't in there? Yeah. Suck a dick. This is chat. This isn't so many insight now. This is income aggression. Get the fuck out. The clues in the title, guys. It's income aggression. Okay. China. So anyway,
if they do a format like they did at Worlds, though, where it's a round robin best of or best of 1 in the group stage, I do think that really favors TSM, though, because TSM have shown like historically that they're awful at preparation. Like when they do preparation, they do it really well, but like if you go all the way back to Starhorn Royal Club versus TSM in the group stage at Worlds and how Starhorn Royal Club destroyed them the first time, then TSM had their time where okay, we're going to take this seriously, actually prep for it. They did a fantastic job. They beat Starhorn Royal Club the second time around. When TSM prepped for World Elite versus GE Tigers not prepping for World Elite, they just dumpstered them both times to walk to their championship at IAM.
I don't think this has been said enough, Froskurinn. One of the things that tilts me about the way people use the IEM tournament as their metric for how good these teams are is that they don't realize themselves the bias that they're including. Okay, so here's the bias. They say, GE Tigers lost to Team WE. And remember, GE Tigers won a game there, so they lost 2 games and they won 1 game out of the 3. Mm-hmm. But we know that GE Tigers not only didn't prep for WE, but couldn't have known they were going to, because everyone thought CJ is going to be the team that gets out there instead. So they couldn't prep for them, and they still won a game off them, and then they lost 2, okay. Now, what people forget is TSM definitely knew who they were playing. They even got to see WE play against GE in a best of 3. That's a big advantage in itself. And on top of that, remember, TSM still almost lost game 1 themselves. So they almost lost a game to WDE. So it's totally ridiculous the way people present it as if like, well, WE took care of GE Tigers easily, but then in the final, TSM just clean swept them. And they never mention how game 1 was super close and all those problems. It's interesting how, that's where you can see the bias is creeping in there. Because it's at that point in that description, at no point am I hating on any of those teams. I'm actually trying to be as fair as I can to the circumstances of all 3 teams. So anyway, going forwards, see, don't trigger me with TSM talk, Froskurinn. I was staying in the world of Asia there, but if we're talking about being triggered and arguing about things, then you have put together a list.
Yeah.
And based on the fact that I'm going to release this tonight, I don't think this list will be out by now. So maybe people will just have to look forward to it in the future. This will be a little teaser. But Froskurinn made a list of the top 20 players of all time because I challenged her to. Like I told her, basically, she was sick of being berated for the opinions of Soldier and Kelsey that she herself didn't stand by, that she was being held accountable for as a complicit, accessory to their crimes. No, you were an active conspirator.
Oh,
like
okay.
you. So
I was driving the getaway car.
Because of that, I demanded that you make your own list, and this time you have to stand by it all. Okay, you have to think it through, you have to put them in order, and then the whole point is then if I say why is this one here, you can't be like, well, Kelsey was like really insistent that like he make the top 17, and then Soldier was like, yeah, that guy blows some shit, cacao, who the fuck's he in? And like those aren't good reasons as to why the guy's 17th. Okay, you have to tell me, oh, he's 17th because of this criteria and this one, and he had the more resources on the team, and he's really good on like Lee Sin now and stuff. Whoever we might be talking about, I don't know why I'd use those examples. Whoever we might be referring to, but then I can ask you and we can actually debate it. Okay. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna go down your list, and as I go down, I'll pick out if there's anything interesting. Okay, and you can kind of give me your perspective or discuss. Light-hearted, playful discussion might happen, We'll see what breaks out, okay? So I'm going to start out. Now, first of all on the list, one of the good things is, Froskurinn, much like I did on my list, made an attempt to actually outline her criteria. Like, how does she weight things? Why is something important as a piece of criteria? That's all good. So we'll start at the top, because the top names are going to have the least actual arguing and more just like, why is this person there? Or a lot of the top 10 is what a lot of people would agree on, actually. So number 1 doesn't really need a whole lot of talk, actually, because it's Faker, and I don't actually know anyone who I consider an expert who doesn't have Faker number 1 on their list. Like, that one's a given. Now number 2, you've got Dandy. Now that's very interesting because most people I know, you might not know this, Froskurinn, but if I had to think from all the conversations I've had with people, number 2 is actually a spot that lots of people would have different players at. So a lot of people, especially maybe traditionalists, might have Mata there. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, maybe if they're really old school people, might have like Mad Life up there. Or maybe people like me, like I did, would have Wei Zhao there. But of all those names, you've actually got Dandy there, whereas I think for most of us, Dandy would be maybe 3 at best, maybe 4, more around 3 to 5 for most people. Why is Dandy number 2?
So when I do this list, and as the list gets exposed, as Thorin goes down, you guys will see that there's what's the word I'm looking for?
Words.
There's like a pattern. There's a trend. There's a trend to it. So I really wanted to wait. One of the big things that I outlined for the list is the scope. So obviously I'm not a historian like Thorin is, and I actually came into a challenge where I hadn't experienced a lot of the Korean games. I haven't experienced a lot of the Western games, and finding VODs, like season 1 is completely excluded first and foremost because it's impossible to find fucking VODs that time around. So I had to go back and I had to find very limited frames of view to kind of get a gauge on these players to put them successfully in this list because I don't know them very intimately. My experience is in the LPL scene, which obviously is going to weight my list to Chinese names, and we'll see how many Chinese names actually end up on this list. But for Dandy and Mata, because these are actually a package. Yeah. Initially, when I made the list, I put Mata and then I put Dandy because I really do weight shot calling, and since Mata was the shot caller for Samsung White, and then the first 4 names I have who I deem are the best players of all time in the most competitive era of League of Legends, which a lot of people will talk about the golden era as far as being season 2 in League of Legends, as far as every single region having a very dominant team. You know, you have Moscow 5, you have Zubu Frost, CLG EU, like World Elite, you have all of these teams pretty much all over the world, and so the level of competition across the board internationally is really high. But as far as the highest point where I think League of Legends has been played at its utmost best was during the Samsung White, Samsung Blue, SKT, like the last year golden era of OGN. I think that was probably the most competitive league and the most competitive moment for League of Legends. And these players who are the players that I deem were like the best out of the most competitive region. So it's kind of like this who are the best in the most competitive, and then it turns into like this legacy.
No, listen, I agree. Like, I actually think, I don't know how much I've discussed this before, but to me, it's pretty obvious that the most competitive OGN season ever was OGN Spring 2014. That one, to me, there was a bunch of different teams, could have made the final, could have even won the league, you know. There's some very, very good teams in the whole playoffs there was super sick. So, Dandy's number 2 for why, though? Okay, so you've explained the golden era part, but why is he specifically number 2?
When I was thinking about why I loved Mata and how Mata modernized and revolutionized the support, especially because when Mata was really getting a lot of international attention and the Western audience was starting to look at him, it was during the revolution of like the trinket system and figuring out how Vision was going to be changing and how it would direct the style of the game. And Mata got a lot of credit for that, and undoubtedly he deserves it. He was also incredibly dominant in lane phase. People always kind of made fun of Imp, that, you know, Imp wouldn't be as great because if he didn't have Mata as his lane opponent, that even though Imp was an amazing AD carry, Mata could 2v1 in the lane by himself. But 50% of what made Mata great was in tandem with Dandy. And Dandy doesn't get, like, people talk about how Dandy, he's intelligent, he was, you know, about the vision control and knowing exactly where the other jungler was and making the most efficient play at that time. But a lot of that was in tandem with Mata's vision control and powers. Like it was Dandy walking alongside of him. So it was really hard for me to separate, is it Mata who's in charge of the vision and Revelize vision, or was it also Dandy? And then I just thought between the two, yeah, Mata's the shot caller, but unfortunately he's the support. And is it unfair that I'm going to dock Mata because he's in the support role versus Dandy, who's in a much more influential role as the jungler? I mean, at the end of the day, pointing at Samsung White for me, the defining player and the carry for that team was Dandy, because even in the up and downs of Samsung White's career, Mata had some really low lows where he just choked. I mean, there was this the idea of, if we just tilt him, we just make him mad, you can make Mata underperform. But Dandy has always been consistent, even in games where they choked at Season 3 Worlds. Dandy still consistently performed well.
Okay, listen, I think there's actually a lot of merit to your reasoning here. Like, I can understand it when you lay it out like this. Like, I actually agree with you there. One of the hard things about that Season 3 Worlds tournament is when people look at it, they want to just be, as always, they want to be like, oh, they lost, they got shit on by a bunch of teams, like Europeans especially. I guess they all sucked at that tournament, like, you know, every single one. Mm-hmm. But I actually think, just as when someone wins, you know, when someone wins a tournament, I don't give everyone equal credit. In the same way, I don't give everyone equal blame when they lose. I look at what role do you play and then how did you individually play. And I agree, in terms of that tournament, I think it was less Dandy than most of the other players who had problems. Like, I thought the two best players in their team easily was Looper and Dandy in terms of the relative to their position at that Season 3 Worlds. Then after that, Imp was like okay time to time. And to me, Dade really choked because he's the main carry and he choked. But then Mata also really choked because his vision control was terrible in this tournament. For some weird reason, he was super off that aspect of his game that was exceptional, you know. So it's true, he has had some less than stellar performances, whereas I agree, Dandy's level very rarely drops below a certain kind of measurement, you know. He has like a certain level of excellence it'll never go below, and obviously his highs are very consistently high. I also think it is worth, I think you can have an interesting debate between the two there, Dandy and Mata, as to who was the better, because I actually said this after Worlds. You know, at Worlds, the official MVP was given to Mata, whereas to me, the official MVP, I'm sorry, I would have given to Dandy. Like, I think it's close, but to me it was Dandy, because Dandy outclassed everyone at his position significantly, and then literally in the final just totally bodied the guy at his position who was having a great tournament, you know. So I thought he was amazing in that tournament. So that tournament, I would give it the edge to Dandy. I will, to get on Mata's side of things, I'll kind of give some aspects that I think are stronger, though, that maybe you didn't reference entirely, okay, which is, one is that over the history of their careers, it switches back. That last criteria I just gave you, where Dandy was head and shoulders above every single jungler by far at Worlds, and on certain champions where the other junglers just could not play Rengar and Jarvan like Dandy could, you know. He was just a god on these, and they would try and they couldn't do it. The difference is, over his career, that's like what Mata had against supports. For the majority of his career, he was just head and shoulders above every other support. And in all aspects of the game, almost, you know. Like, the interesting thing was, someone made this point on that recent Riot thing where they released the world skins. When they were talking about the Thresh of Mata, they actually made a very pertinent point, which is that when you think of Mata's Thresh, you actually don't think of like a million Mad Life flash hooks into a box, into Lantern carry. It's not that sort of playmaking, but his Thresh is still utterly dominant because it's just a lane monster. Like, I always think of Mata, and I think he's the best ever at use of Flay. Like, the way he will use it to, like, stop you or to then chain it into a hook afterwards. Like, he's just amazing at that. And so when I think of his lane control, I don't think I've ever seen a support who was that dominant in lane. Like, almost any matchup, he can just bully. Like, that's the thing. He's the guy where he's the... That's why Thresh is one of his best champions. He's the guy where he just bullies you all the time as the support. Like, he's just fucking your AD carry up. He's making your AD carry choose whether to take the CS or whether to back off and not take damage. And no support could ever essentially go head to head with him and stop him doing that. Like, it was very difficult to. I mean, I have always told this story on Summoning Insight that when the Lemon Dogs bot lane came from Europe, and they'd been by far the best European bot lane, and they came to Worlds, and they were playing all these different bot lanes in the tournament, and they were doing okay against a bunch of them that were very famous bot lanes, but they said when they would scrim against MVP Ozone, well, Samsung Ozone's bot lane of Mata and Imp, that Mata and Imp, they thought were just trolling them, because they would purposely pick like losing matchups. Like, they would pick Vayne into some super strong laning matchup just to then dominate Mithy and Tabs and shit on them anyway, and like completely demoralize them. And you just felt like there's nothing we can do. They're doing this with like the bad matchups, so like they would kill us with the real matchups. So yeah, to me, I think I agree. Okay, I'd say it like this: Dandy is more well-rounded, and he has a lot more areas that he's the best in, but in certain areas I think Mata was just untouchable. So I think that's just a preference one. I don't have any issue with that. I just wanted to know why you had Dandy there.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting when I was really examining, because to even get the group of like the pool of players to create the top 20, I started looking at who I thought were the best teams of all time. And so, of course, you're putting down like SKT, Moscow 5, CLG EU. I actually also had Fnatic initially, just because I thought if we're talking about like greatest Western teams of all time, Samsung White, Samsung Blue. And I kind of came to this decision that Samsung White, I thought, has probably been not the most dominant in terms of like duration, but as far as like their peak performance and ceiling cap, like the eye test, that they were the best team. But if you think about it, their best players on that team are both in the supportive roles. And so it got me into this discussion and thinking about like OMG, who's considered like an all-star team, that the issue with OMG is that they don't have any of their all-stars who will play supportive players. And I was wondering, like, is it a coincidence that I think that Samsung White is possibly the best team to ever play the game when their best players are playing the most supportive roles on the team? They don't have these all-star carries. You know, they don't have Faker in the mid lane.
See, that is the interesting thing, especially is the thing that made it... the thing that I think really helped the careers of Dandy and Mata is actually the fact that Dade did leave and Pawn came in. Because before that, their big win had been when they'd won the OGN season. And unfortunately, in the finals, the star of that final was actually Dade. Dade's Zed just utterly killed Ambition, who at the time was an amazing mid laner, and he was just killing everyone. He was absolutely insane. So at the time, he initially seemed like, well, he's the carry, and then traditionally, Imp was the carry when they didn't used to have Mata, and they used to be not that good a team, and so that whole thing made it really confused, because these all are great players we're talking about here, and so then to decide, well, who at which point in time is more important, but then when you came to the Worlds, which is the big tournament, the main one they won, and the main one they won with Pawn, it was pretty clear-cut that the two best players on this team was Mata and Dandy, so I think that helps in that sense, and in a weird way, it does make sense to me that one of the best teams of all time. Okay, think about it this way. The two best teams of all time for most people is SK Telecom and Samsung White. Samsung White basically had the best possible supportive players and then really good players in the carry roles, but who don't have to be the best necessarily, even in the world at their position, and probably weren't. Then SKT has, at the time, maybe the best players in the traditional carries, you know, but not the best supportives, instead supportive players that work really well within their team. So it's actually two diametrically opposed philosophies almost, you know. And they both had massive levels of success, and it's really preferences to who you think's the best, you know. But it's also interesting to me that if you actually took those teams and you didn't tell me the names of the players, you just described them like that, like one team has the best supportive players and they're really good players in the carry roles, and one team traditionally had the best carries but the supportive roles aren't the best on their team. If you then showed me the records, I'd say that it'd be the other way around. I'd assume, right, the team with the super godly carries would probably win the one tournament and look super good doing it. That'd be like Worlds last year. And then the team that goes undefeated and like wins 2 OGNs and wins the Worlds as well, that'll probably be the team with gods at the supportive roles and then the really good Actually, it's the other way around. That's the curiosity to me, is that the Samsung White team has the sick lineup, and yet they only really won one team with that lineup. They won one tournament. So I think that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure why that would be even. Do you have a theory? Do you have any thoughts?
No, I mean, like I said, it really only just occurred to me the other night, and I was just like, damn. I mean, I wonder if that says something in the makeup of the teams, or even if, I don't even think it has anything to do with the meta, just because Samsung White went through various changes, and of course part of their strength was their flexibility, and that they were almost impervious to meta, specifically in Mata and Dandy's position.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. Here's the interesting factor if you want to have that debate. Now, in terms of that debate, I actually still think SKT is the better one, not least because they did it in more than one tournament. Okay.
But they had the undefeated record afterwards.
And they won 2 OGN titles, and, you know, there's a bunch of different reasons as to why, and they played a lot of different opponents. You know, there's a lot of great things going for SKT. But one of the problems that one of the reasons why it's a debate is because I think that Samsung White's Worlds was incredibly dominant. Now, admittedly, it's not against only Koreans, it's against some teams that are lesser as well. But okay, it's very, very dominant. Like, there's no question they're the best team in that tournament. In every series, they're the best game. In every game, they're the best team pretty much. Yes, TSM fans. In every game, they're the best team. Anyway, so they're so dominant that gives them a special edge in that regard, okay? Whereas actually, here's the interesting thing. I think SKT had times where they actually they had weakness, okay? They had a famous game, the one that Monty mentioned in our end of year awards against KTB, where they almost lost a game, but Faker had to literally just hard carry it on Riven to win the game for them and keep them undefeated. They had the OGN Summer Finals where they almost lost to KT, where KT had the edge on them, was doing well against them, Liu was doing well. They had at Worlds the semi-final where they might have lost to Najin Blacksword. The point here is, SKT, even though they have the better record, more wins and all the rest of it, an undefeated season, they at times looked more mortal in their best moments than Samsung White did. But what's the key thing that SKT had that Samsung White doesn't have? Faker. They had the best player ever by far. So in a weird way, SKT kind of had like the ultimate get out of jail free card, the ultimate like break the glass in case of emergency, because no matter what happened, they could still know that every now and then the best player ever at any role to ever play the game is going to turn up and just win the whole game for us. So if you're Samsung White, you can't necessarily do that, you know, even with all the special talents you have.
No, you're right.
So, okay, number 4 on your list is Dade. Now, what are you thinking here?
Initially, I had Wei Xiao over Dade, and then again, I came back to my reflection on just talking about who I thought were the best players performing at the highest level that League of Legends has ever been played. And it was hard because between Wei Xiao and Dade, if you're actually comparing them since they are 4 and 5 respectively, Wei Xiao is effectively the faker of the AD carry position. But I feel like that's unfair to dock that against Dade and to put Wei Xiao over Dade, because he's pretty much second to the best player to ever play the game. Like the fact that Dade's only standing second to this guy that's head and shoulders above every other player. So I didn't think that was a fair comparison. For Dade's career, why I put him underneath Mata and Dandy is because if we talk about Mata and Dandy's lows, Dade has had some extreme lows. He does have an insane achievements record. It's not necessarily in taking the title for, obviously he has 2 OGN titles, but for how many finals he's been in. But of course, like some of those finals weren't all his doing.
True. One in particular.
But so it was tough. Like I wanted to put him underneath Dada or Dandy and Mata, even though I consider him the second best mid player to play the game, and the fact that he's only second to Faker. But I had to dock him for his inconsistency issues and also his recent performance. But I had to put him over Wei Xiao because he competed in the toughest level of competition that the game has ever seen, and he's one of like, I think SKT is the only other team to have 2 OGN titles. Like he's the only player, and he did it on 2 different rosters.
Now, luckily I've already got my top 20 list, so I've already gone into why I think Wei Xiao's super. I have him number 2 all time. I think the guy's fucking amazing. I think there's almost no area that you can look at Wei Xiao's career and say that he's anything less than the best or deficient. Now I realise in a world where Western commentators whose name aliases are 4 letters long, they'd be like, well, he only made round of 8 at the Worlds, but Uzi made, well, he would never say Uzi. I've failed already there. He would say Uzi made 2 Worlds finals. So I realise with that sort of inane comment that actually has no details combined about analysis or who's better or what, it's just 2 is more than 0. Like that's about the limit of their analysis there. Now personally, there's more than enough outside of the who made the World's Finals to make Wei Xiao the best AD carry by far and one of the best players ever. Like, especially like I mentioned, as weird as it sounds, most people are only going to talk about him for the Season 2 into Season 3 shit. But I actually think what he did in the summer of 2014 is kind of like just added a little bit on top of how amazing his career was, because he's doing it then with no resources. And personally, you know my feelings on this, I think even in World Elite, he didn't have as many resources as some people might suggest he had, might have billed him as having. They sometimes say other players in that team were better, mid lane, jungle. You know, some of them, some crazy motherfuckers, even start suggesting that, like, his support player was some sort of god, or like, right, look at his accomplishment. Like, yeah, okay, enough with the noise. We're talking about Wei Xiao now. A little respect, please, for the man, for the king, okay? So, you know, to me, he was the king, he was that, but he was a conquering king. He took all of that, he created his empire from nothing, you know? He was just a farm boy in some outskirts district village, okay, who came and he conquered, he gathered his army through his own sword wielding, you know. He built up that army from a band of you know, ragtag warriors, and he created himself into a general, into the king of a nation, into an emperor. Okay, there you go, Froskurinn. He was the emperor. And here's the thing, to me, I'm not exaggerating, if Faker didn't exist, I really think Wei Xiao would be, like, to this day, the pinnacle of what anyone could ever become relative to their position and, like, the world of how good they are. Because that's the key thing. This is why I always used to say, there used to be this debate, okay, again, this was only Western people having this debate of, like, who is the best AD carry in the world? Is it, like, Doublelift or is it Wei Xiao? The difference is, with Doublelift, we all know he was very, very good at one point in time, but everyone can break down some of his flaws. That didn't happen with Wei Xiao. When Wei Xiao was at his peak, he was just, like, flawless. It was almost perfect, you know. His champion pool was insane. The way he played the champions was innovative. He was the best on certain champions. Even the champions you didn't think of him as the best on. Like, he wasn't thought of as, like, a Vayne main, but his Vayne was fucking amazing. Like, and then coming in 2014, now you're playing totally different champions. You're playing fucking Lucian. He's adapting to a totally new meta. He's really good then. Then he's playing without even a good support player. The reasons for this guy are just endless. I think he's fucking absolutely insane. So, you've given your reasons why you put the usurper Dade above him there, but okay. It's not that big a deal.
I put him at the top of my legacy stretch of the list.
Okay, so then here's one that's going to blow people's minds. I don't know whether this is like Froskurinn's, like, please Westerners like me again, but
don't you know who my favorite Western team is?
She has Alex Ich, number 6 of all time. Mm-hmm. So why would that be?
Okay, if you don't know this, because everyone knows.
So wait a second. So Alex Ich, remember, she's saying, remember the men's we've had so far is better than my life. Alex Ich is better than whoever you want, Chai, Flame, everyone except those top 5 players. Alex Ich, why?
Okay, so we're in the legacy stretch of my list. So we talked about how the reason why I put Dandy, Mata, and Dade and Faker above the legacy players is because I thought that they were competing when League of Legends was at its highest point level of competition. Legacy players, then you have to put Wei Xiao. He revolutionized an entire role. Alex Ish, to me, is not to the same extent that Wei Xiao. I think that he was... his consistency obviously went down, but let's talk about Moscow 5. So Alex Ish was the shot caller from Moscow 5 as well as the mid laner. He created a play style. Moscow 5 revolutionized, to me, how League of Legends was played. Lane phase. The fact that lane phase didn't exist for Moscow 5, that the first 15 minutes of the game were just absolutely insane for them. And if he's the shot caller and the mastermind of that and, you know, telling people where to go, that A is already incredible and amazing. They were the kings of Season 2, probably one of the most dominant teams that League of Legends has ever seen. And then his play and his performance individually within that was just also flawless and amazing on multiple champions. Now, when they became Gambit Gaming, Alex started to, again, find these lows. Eventually, he came back to, like, his Kha'Zix mid shit and started tearing shit up. And you also have to think, like, who he's performing well with. He's got Ginja, Edward, Darian. I mean, obviously there's Diamond, but the other three guys, I think you made a car analogy at one point on Summoning Insight where you were talking about comparing members of Gambit Gaming to different aspects in the car. And like one of them was the engine and someone was a tire. So, I don't know. I just value the Moscow 5 changed how the game was played for the better. And they modernized lane phase and roaming and ganks and pressure. And just, I have to give that to Alex. I have to recognize Alex there.
Also, something interesting about Alex Ich that I don't think is often overplayed enough. Here's another thing. My theory on why people either overrate him and say, like, they're either huge fans and they go crazy over him, or they're kind of like, he was a bit overrated, is because his position in history is really weird, because in his best period, Froskurinn was technically a better mid laner, okay, because Froskurinn had more control and was just the best player overall at the time, okay, had like more aspects that were going from in that sense. So that's a problem. And then after that period, going into Season 3, this was the era when, yes, Xpeke did kind of have an edge over Alex, because they were both playing the Assassins, and Xpeke was the better one on certain ones of those players, or just had, and he had a better team around him, for being fair, at that period in time. So again, Alex is kind of like a man out of time. He's not got many periods where he's like clear-cut the best in his role even. But the thing is, if you look at the bridge of where Alex Ich comes from, one of the things that makes Froggun's career so interesting is that you didn't have elite level mid laners that played Froggun's style of like the super passive farm style, become super powerful, then try and dominate the game in the team fight, etc., and become the main carry. Instead, the players who had the skills who could have done what Froskurinn did were all these like skirmish fight 1v1 lane type players. So they were like the big fat LPs, Ocelots, Reginalds of the world, where their style was like, right, I'm going to get a powerful champion, like whatever, Cassiopeia, something like this, and I'm going to try and just really early on find a time where I'm like a level ahead and attack and go all in and get a kill, or I'm going to try and get my jungler come, we're going to try and kill the other guy, and it's all about snowballing the mid lane. That was the whole game, was I want to be the one who snowballs on my champions, or, you know, whatever. That was the whole style. And so coming out of that world, Alex Ich took that sort of style and just was the best at it. He was the best of that style. He was better than Reginald, Ocelot, Big Fat, you know, these people who were his peers in that style. So it's not that he innovated he didn't innovate the mid lane style, but he just took it and went above and beyond it. Then he combined it with what Diamond was doing that was innovative in the jungle. So he would push up in a certain way where he could then go and help Diamond in his jungle, etc., where other people would still be thinking like, well, if you have the advantage, now you want to try and kill the other guy or dive him under the top, you know, whatever it is. Like, he was the best in this particular sense. So to me, he's just like the prototypical aggressive mid laner. He's the best ever, I think, in that sense of that particular style. And Xpeke had times where he was close, etc. But Alex, for the breadth of his career and who he played with, I think he's just exceptional in that particular respect. And I'm just amazed that over the seasons he was it. It's amazing now that people think of him as washed up and he wasn't that good, and you know, because of all his challenger problems.
Amazing.
But that's the crazy thing, because the thing is, much more so than like an Xpeke, he was the ultimate meta-resistant player in terms of the Westerners, you know. He was the guy where there never was a period. Here's the time, there were times where Xpeke could be better than him on Champions, but Alex Ich was never bad during those periods, you know. It wasn't until sort of like the 2014 era when Gambit started to fall off themselves that Alex ever did fall off. So he had like a solid 2-year stretch where he could always find a way to be really effective and really explosive in the game. So yeah, I've got a lot of respect for him, obviously, as a player. Now, number 8, though. Let me see. Number 8. So, number 7 was Mad Life.
Mad Life, yeah.
Okay, let me just ask this. We can't have like 50 minutes on every topic. So, in terms of Mad Life, is there just a reason why he's lower? Is there a reason why he's not as high as a lot of other people would have him?
I think an issue is that really learning about Mad Life and finding the scope in the VODs, I probably didn't have enough time to really delve into it. So obviously I have a much smaller frame of reference for Mad Life, despite the fact that this guy is so, like, his career is so long, which also makes it really hard to really look at every scope and shape and size of Mad Life. Whereas I was already in tuned and already a fan to Alex. I mean, I really just credited to Mad Life that he revolutionized and modernized the support role and how it's played today. He had highs and lows in his career. A big issue for me is that it took Mad Life so long to kind of get his shit together and because I mean, now he's performing really well, but that said, at the same token, and I don't want to put it so much on that talent has left Korea, and so that's why Mad Life's able to perform better, because I don't think that's it. I think it's almost like maybe not a confidence issue. I don't know, because I feel like Mad Life's always had these capabilities, and there's never times where he just like blatantly feeds, but there are times in games where he just doesn't do anything. Whereas you think about him as this playmaking support of causing all of the action for his team, but there are points in Mad Life's career where he just stopped doing that.
Okay. I mean, if I had to give a theory for that, here's my theory as to why it is that there's times when he was less effective.
Do you think it had to do with space?
It's really not known in his career, but one thing that's unique about Mad Life that people don't know is because he's such a playmaker, people assume because he's a playmaker, he must be like a leader type person and that he comes up with the plan. But actually, I think a lot of his playmaking is like purely intuitive, as in he just kind of has a feel for the game of when he can do something, and he just does it without thinking in a way, without hesitation. It's not really a plan that he makes, okay? So his playmaking capacity is incredible and unique, but actually in terms of having the plan and being the guy who directs things, it's not really him. Like, he's not the Mata type guy. In fact, when I've spoken to people like in the past, Lord Loco Doco, and when I've seen topics about when Woong was the AD carry there, people won't realize this, but those players led the lane. They told Mad Life where to go and if we're going to be aggressive now and if we're going to go all in the opponent. So even though he's the more talented of the pairing here, he's much better than Loco Doco is, he's much better than Woong is, he's much better than Hermes later in Space. He actually relies on them to a degree to kind of he's kind of on a leash that they're holding the lead of, okay? They're telling him, right, now we go in Mad Life. So it's up to them to a degree, even though they're the lesser player, to kind of figure out when we are aggressive and how we play this lane out and when we back up, you know. Mm-hmm. He needs them to sort of know his strengths and kind of aim him. He's like the missile, but they have to aim him and decide when they let it off, you know. And so part of his problem, I think, was that when he comes into the world where, for example, when he had Hermes, after Woong left, he had Hermes as his AD carry. Hermes is like a young guy who's just coming into a team, and if anything, he needs leadership. He's not a guy who can do this sort of thing and tell the legendary Mad Life what to do there, so there's a bit of inaction there. Then when you come to Space himself's a reasonably passive player, he's a very average player, he's not a player like that. So I think actually, bizarrely, it helped that the personalities of Loco Doco and Woong. Loco Doco's a very cocky player who thinks he's much better than he is and always had a quite deluded opinion of himself, so I can see that he could will easily tell Mad Life, like personality-wise, that you do this now. And in Woong's case, it's not that Woong was cocky like that, but Woong knew how exceptional Mad Life was, and Woong was a smart player, so he knows how to use Mad Life. So in a weird way, I think that's a component of it. I'm not sure why now it's changed around and why he's come out. I haven't figured that part of my theory, but I think that plays into it in a weird way. Like, maybe people don't know the context there. No. Now, going beyond that, though, after Mad Life, we get to a number, which I can already tell you that we haven't read them yet, but the YouTube comments now will say like, oh, Froskurinn like had to put Frog at number 8 because she loves Thorin, and he would kick her off the show if she did it. Like, how did the much disputed Froggen, like, people have already seen you attack me, actually like go in on, yeah, like use that whole like attack is the best form of defense. Like, if I'm talking about Krylov, suddenly, even though he has nothing to do with it, Froggen just comes in out of nowhere. You're like, what about Froggen? Even just this, like, it's like I've seen you attack me over this, you know. More so than Flame. Like, you won't go in on Flame in the same degree, but you go in on Froggen, because right now it's like the stock's low, so you think it's time to go in because he's doing so badly in elements. So if you attack him so much, how did he become to be number 8 of all time on your list?
The reason why I dislike Froggen, and I don't dislike Froggen as a person, you two comments, the reason why I dislike Froggen as a player is because I don't value his playstyle. Obviously, I'm a fan of the Chinese region of Moscow 5 of Alexish, so I value aggression. Just that's my personal opinion. When grading Froggen, however, and when setting up to do this list, I wanted to do it right, so I had to pick up a bunch of VODs. I searched forever to find CLG EU VODs, and I started coming across performances of Froskurinn where he literally just goes super ham. So I've had now more exposure to Froskurinn where he plays both sides, and I knew it was possible. Everyone always says, Froskurinn, he plays assassins in the mid lane. I mean, even recently he's played things like Fizz last year in the mid lane, but it's still just his playstyle. He's very conformed to his own lane. But when setting aside my biases for how I prefer the game to be played, Froskurinn defined a mid lane style. I know, Thorin, you like to explain it as Froskurinn was the first player to recognize that why is the kill worth anything? Because of the gold that allows you to itemize. Why look for the kill when I can get 100% for sure the same amount of gold in CS? And to trade CS versus risk or reward.
The risk of getting the kill, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, getting the kill has its own bonus, which is pressure, and the other guy loses CS. That's all true.
Yeah.
But the difference is there are times when the kill that you go for and fail fucks the whole lineup for you, versus if you actually could get the same gold in farm, it would actually be more beneficial. Like you could more reliably build that lead up, or to counteract that, when you're in losing matchups in terms of normal CSing, etc., you can make up the difference there and make it more even in that sense, and then gain the benefits of maybe you're a better scaling champion later. It's a way of controlling the game essentially from your position. Whereas in some of these other aspects, you're either relying on just outplaying someone, or you need your team to help you win the game. So in a weird way, I think it comes partly as a result of the teams he was on, because you can't necessarily trust all your teammates to the same degree some of the other names on this list can, where they have phenomenal teammates. And then you add in that aspect, like I say, of like, in a sense, if you could get the gold, this is a more reliable way to do it.
No, I agree. And so I just, upon reflection, watching the VODs, I found more value in what Froskurinn was bringing to the scene. Part of the legacy players, CLG EU was definitely one of the best teams to ever play the game. Froskurinn is undisputedly the carry and the source of power for that team. I couldn't put him above Alexish just because CLG EU, if you're looking at Moscow 5 versus CLG EU, they won some really good tournaments, but they weren't as dominant as Moscow 5. And so that's why Frogurinn's lower.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, the main area of deficiency for Froskurinn is achievements. Like, he's the guy where he has the achievements in terms of lots of, like, top fours and makes finals and stuff. He's got that level of achievements, especially domestically, but then he doesn't have very many tournaments won for a start off. And all the other names on this list, they're, like, multiple-time champions or winners of, that's his main deficiency, is he doesn't have the championships in that sense. So I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that in my top 10, actually. In fact, where was Froskurinn in mine? I think I had him around 7 or 8, didn't I?
I tried not to look at yours when putting mine together.
Oh, I see how it is. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah. Sick burn. Okay. Number 9 was Diamond Prox.
Yep. I have all 3 evolutions of the aggressive jungler on here. You will find out. Diamond, I couldn't put above Alexish because I thought that Alex had more to do with the success of Moscow 5, but Diamond revolutionized how the jungle was played. There's like a theme in the beginning of this list. It's all about like modernized how AD carries were played, revolutionized the support and the vision. Diamond just was extent of pressure, ganking, aggressive jungle styles.
I mean, he revolutionized jungle, sure. He had a lot to do with that. I have to say, I kind of agree that I think here's the thing. This is one of those statements where people go crazy. Like, I think Diamond Prox is overrated. And people are like, oh my God, you're talking about he's the best. No, that's the problem. That's why he's overrated, because he is one of the best players ever. I have him in my top 10, remember? So I'm saying he's a phenomenal player, one of the best ever, above many Koreans who played his position. The problem I have is that he is the ultimate player, well, one of them, in terms of Westerners only looking at his best games, his best champions, his best periods of time, and ignoring kind of the average of his level. Like, it's not like he didn't. By the way, in Season 2, he did not invade every single other person's jungle, put them down 5 kills, get all the kills on himself, go and snowball the whole game, carry the whole game, kill everyone. No. He did that some games that were very significant, and at the time, junglers simply didn't do that. So that alone was utterly incredible. And he did innovate a lot of picks, and he did all this stuff. But first of all, he had peers at times in his career, especially beyond Season 2. He definitely had peers that were as good, Dandy, etc. But I think people just go a bit too far with Diamond in a way that actually they don't for other players. Like, the same sort of person who gets mad that I say Frogurinn's so good, then themselves goes way above and beyond being reasonable on Diamond Prox. So it's confusing to me that people have their own little biases that they can never see. They can't see their own blind spots, essentially. So yeah, Diamond Prox, fantastic player, but kind of in line with what you're saying. To me, in the team, yes, Diamond Prox is the unique player who... Here's what's bizarre, okay? To put it in this context, Diamond Prox was the best jungler in the world when Alexish wasn't the best mid laner in the world, but of the two players, to me, Alexish was the better player in the team. Now, that might seem counterintuitive to people, but it's actually perfectly fine, because obviously, think about it this way. You could have a scenario where Let me think. Okay, so Dade was worse than Faker when Faker was at his prime, but that doesn't mean that Dade has to be worse than Deft, who someone could have made the claim was the best AD carry at the time. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. One can be the best player at his position, but the other one can be the better player. That's actually fine. That's not even a logical inconsistency. That's just the way people naturally happen to think. Like, well, if he's the best at the position, he must be the best. No, that doesn't go. Anyway, number 10 is Name, which is actually around where I think I actually had him higher, but okay, we both have him in the top 10. Is there anything unique to say about Name, or can we just pass over this one?
Pass over. I think this is the part where we leave the legacy players and we start entering what I determined as the new kids on the block.
Yeah.
Or like the new age.
Number 11, Cacao. Again, I have Cacao reasonably high. I can't remember exactly well. I think a bit lower than this, but I have him quite high because to me, I mean, his main problem, the main knock on Cacao is no internationals tournaments, basically, beyond in fact, none, I think. So, yeah, he has the issue there. Is there anything else to say about Cacao Extra?
The performance test. That's pretty much what Cacao just because
he's got an A+ on that, right?
Yeah, just out of this world.
Just on the eye test, he's got the very high.
He eye fucks right? You. That's his eye test.
Well, we all love to be eye fucked, even if we deny it. You know. Interesting. See, that's the thing. It's much like a beautiful woman. You know, when she's like, "Oh, look at that creep over there. He keeps looking at me." Yeah, it's only when it's the creep that she gets mad. Okay, when it's like the James Bond man of mystery, she's loving it. Then she's loving all that attention and the little games he plays and looking back and forwards, the flirtatious aroma of excitement that's in the air. You know. I'm teaching you a lot here, Froskurinn. Again, this is not only incoming aggression in a talk show and to show your skills as an analyst, but it's also in some ways sort of like a goodwill hunting. It's sort of like, it's sort of like finding Froskurinn. That's what this movie could be called. Okay, I'm trying to bring out the inner voice in you and mentor you into becoming a successful person. Unfortunately, that statement alone might then have just killed any chance of your career going further with Riot, because as soon as they hear that, it's like you're off limits at that point. But it's okay, because as we become exceptional people, there'll be other opportunities for Froskurinn, for you and your pink hair and your ditzy inability to speak the English language. We'll develop these things and you will get your chance. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So going beyond, we're going down from Cacao now. Imp. Now, again, people might think that now you've said you didn't look at my list, but people might think again that you're now playing into Thorin's world here, because you're coming into Thorin's world and you've got Imp above Deft, you've got Imp above Piglet, you've got Imp above Uzi, and you know that Thorin thinks that. You know he has him as the best AD carry aside from Wei Zhao, the best Korean AD carry. So why is he this high for you? Well,
when looking at Imp's career, we kind of talked about it earlier, and I'll try to make this brief. When Dade shit the bed, and over kind of like Ozone and White, the Samsung's rocky beginning from MVP to Samsung, Imp has been a consistent. There were time periods where Imp was the primary carry for that team when they were making as many finals as they did.
Yep.
And winning this title. So I couldn't put Imp as high just because I don't think he's really coming to his own where he can be within the top 10 of all time, especially when he had as many resources on as Mata in his lane and things like that. But Imp has certainly solidified himself and proven that he is an amazing player all on his own, and he has a career where he has more consistency than Deft. I think Deft has had higher highs than Imp, but Imp has just been much more consistent than Deft.
Put it this way, Imp, he's one of those players who's so great in as much as everyone is his rival, in a similar sense to Alex Ich in a weird way, okay? Which is that Imp's rivals at a point in time is Double Lift and Wei Zhao. Then Imp's rivals is and Prey as well to some degree early on. And then he's got Piglet. When Piglet's around, that's his rival as well. And then you go beyond that, and now he's got Uzi as his rival, Name is his rival, Deft's his rival. He's the only connecting factor between all of these players, because that's how consistent he is in always being a top 5 AD carry, top 2 in Korea, whatever the positioning is. He always sticks around there. And again, he moves between metas. He'll find a way to go from Caitlyn through to Kog'Maw, through to Jinx, through to, I'm trying to think what else he played more recently, Tristana at Worlds, obviously. He finds a way to get through all these champions, even into Graves most recently. He's quite meta-resistant, actually. He'll find champions that he can use his playing style on. And so that's also why, just because he's really aggressive, people take those terms, I hate the way they do it, and make aggressive and passive into this spectrum where, not a spectrum, a binary thing. You're either aggressive, which means super aggressive non-stop, or you're passive and you never make a play. It's actually a spectrum, okay? And on that spectrum, being aggressive is not one-dimensional. Being aggressive is just its own end of the spectrum that has its own playing options within it. It's not like him just goes 1v5 every fight he gets an opportunity to have, you know. Sometimes he play, like sometimes on Callista he will actually kite out of the fight and then go in, you know, like it's not the same as aggressive's more like the decision making process that then informs what is the playing style, you know. You can have a similar playing style that's more passive. So yeah, anyway, that's my little rant about him there. Beyond that, we now come to the Thorin's two beloved Korean top laners. So Flame and then Shy in that order. So immediately I'm already loving that right there. We've got Flame and then Shy. And then these are two of Thorin's favourites anyway. So anything to say on Flame and Shy?
I had to put Flame over Shy just because of the games and the scope that I watched with Shy. I always saw a very consistent dominating performance from Flame, where I saw some really low blunders from Shy. Likewise, I hear that Shy is a very stubborn player and his champion pool is fairly suspect, whereas Flame is now shown in his most recent performance. And of course, Shy has been picked up in, or picking up his performance in the most recent split. Flame is so meta resistant. Yeah. I mean, whereas Shy's like, he's been the hard carry for Frost before. So.
I mean, especially if you consider this season. Flame literally, during the course of the season, not beforehand like he was told play these champions, during official games, learned how to play Rumble and then actually become quite good on Gnar. These are like the not at all his champions or even his style of play. So yeah, interesting. You have now, I feel like,
I mean, if you've noticed, being a Flame fan, but no, he's very fun to watch.
But if you've noticed, I have actually almost single-handedly, through my efforts and my rationalizations and my explanations of Flame's greatness, I have in some senses converted so many people at this point to Flame's greatness that see, that's one of the few moments ever when I paused Froskurinn. I was going to say that if Flame is Allah, then I am Muhammad. But that might be one of the craziest. That might be the worst thing I've ever said in some ways. Like that might go beyond getting fired for Scum. But whatever, I've said it now. But as a metaphor, that is where you could place it. Okay, because not only that, but I've also aggressively converted people. You know, in terms of the way I put my ideas out there, and I've forced ideas to go head to head. And now I feel like I've won almost everyone over. I think most people would have him as the best top laner ever. He's definitely gonna be everyone's top 20 list. So my work is done. Okay, and it's not that I didn't quite put them to the sword like Muhammad did, but I've actually aggressively ensured that people have to confront the facts of this particular scenario, you know, and they've had to submit to Flame, as it were, to continue the metaphor, which is quite frankly the most dangerous metaphor I've ever used in my career thus far. And so I hope everything goes well for you beyond this first career. But okay, continuing down the list. Now we get to number 15. Oh boy, I almost feel like I should have left more time for the bottom half. So let's quickly, we've already had this discussion many, many times, but why is Clearlove the 15th best player of all time? You've only moved him down one spot from the crazy list that you were claiming like, that was like a committee list, like things had to go. You've only conceded one spot. He's the 15th best player of all time.
I moved Flame up though. I saw the light. Clearlove, to be really quick, I think we discussed it. I'll try to be more concise. He is the greatest herbivore jungler, for me, to ever play the game. I think that, yes, he's been surrounded by amazing teammates, and he's been on two amazing teams, World Elite and EDG. His list of achievements is outrageous. His performance, I mean, like you said, when you eye test him next to Dandy, you're going to see some differences. But for Clearlove's style, I think he's the best. I think he's the utmost style of that herbivore, farming, teamfight-esque jungler, and I don't think anyone does that better than Clearlove.
See, this is where it gets interesting for Froskurinn, because I notice as you were breaking down, you were being absolutely honest as you did it, your criteria for why he was the best. You got through them all. You got through the accomplishments, teams he played on, things he did. Then you made that statement, that amazing statement where you were like, yes, in the eye test, he's not going to do what a Dandy does. Now, here's what's interesting for Froskurinn, because every other name on this list, phenomenal eye test. You look at the eye test and you're like, this guy's a god, one of the best ever at this role. Dominate. Most of the names on this list, especially the names above him, dominate all phases of the game. Like, they're not the players who are only good late game, for example, or only good in this part of the game. Like, for example, Flame's famous as being like a late game carry, and Blaze's star was to get super late game scaling champions. But he was also a monster laner, where it's not like you could just fuck him up in lane, and he could literally pick a scaling champion and still beat you in CS in lane. So they all have these insane advantages in all areas of the game. Now, here's what's interesting. You're saying that Clearlove is the best herbivore jungler ever. Now, I would immediately say that if Dandy wants to play herbivore style, he can be better than Clearlove at it. And I think there was a degree in history where Krylov kind of had to do that style. That was his limitations of his skill set, where he had to do that, and then he had to come out a la Meteos, your lovely beloved Meteos, the marvelous Meteos, as this team fight carry, because that was his way to win the game. He couldn't impact the game to the same degree as the low econ early gank styled Korean jungler, So is there nothing here you're conceding to a degree there? Is Krylov the only one where you concede a little bit of the eye test and you give more credit to the other factors?
I definitely think you have to. That said, watching Krylov play Lee Sin, I mean, there are games when when he is playing that carnivore style where he's just mechanically, he's amazing. You would think that if you didn't see the name tag, you would think, oh, that's Insect playing Lee Sin. Oh, that's Cacao playing Lee Sin. So, I mean, I'm
going to send that clip. That's the only clip I'm going to send to Monty. It's just going to be in his inbox. Like, you would, if you took
I should have said Nocturne.
If he was playing Lee Sin, you'd think, like, hey, that's Cacao or Insect playing Lee Sin. And Monty would just be like, Froskurinn! It's like, but, like, actually, you'll just hit, like, lightning will crack wherever you are. Like, a thunderstorm will roll in after angering the gods of Korean jungler, So, anyway, I just like it as a statement, okay? It's a bold statement. Now, if we go down further, you've got Insect on your list. Now, I didn't have Insect on my list at all, so why does Insect make the top 20 for you?
I had all three of the aggressive junglers. I had Diamond, who is the godfather of the aggressive jungle style. I have Insect, who then turned it up to fucking level 11 and just played out of his mind aggressive. And then I have Cacao, who refined it, modernized it, and perfected it. I couldn't put Insect too high on the list because he's had quite a nosedive as far as his career is concerned. He did play on one of the best teams in Korea for a short stint. I think that he was one of the best junglers for a very short stint. And even on Starhorn Roller Club, he was a fundamental part of that team, and I respected his mechanics enough, and the fact that there is a play or a move in the game that's named after Insect, and so I thought he deserved to be on the top 20 list of all time, but near the bottom.
Yeah, my problem with Insect is that he's one of those guys where most people, even if they are defective in one area, they make up for it by being super strong in some other category. The problem with Insect is in nearly every area he has some defect.
Yeah.
So even in the eye test, well, as much as he's amazing mechanically, and he is one of the best mechanical players ever, he also uses that in quite a stupid way sometimes. And we can see that in the same game he'll do the misplay. He's the guy where it's more like he's trying to just fire out a zillion shots and hope a bunch of them hit, And if they do hit, they're going to hit so spectacularly that to give an analogy for Insect, I'd say it's like a boxer or an MMA fighter who's a really heavy hitter. Like if he actually connects on a punch, it might be a knockout, and it might be so spectacular that you're like, wow, he could be the champion. But actually, he probably can't be the champion because first of all, he can get beaten by the same style, like as we saw when he played Dandy, and the same shit happened to him basically, or when he used to play Cacao, or he can then not have enough technique or enough polish to his game sometimes that he can't always get his best out of it, and there'll be times where he'll just be neutralized to a degree. So yeah, I'm a bit more suspect than Insect. That's why he's not on my top 20 list. Now, you've got Deft here. I'm surprised your bias for this season hasn't lifted Deft a few more places.
I thought about it, and now especially like really reflecting on it. The thing about Deft is, because people would assume, like, why isn't he in tandem with Imp? Why isn't it like Deft Imp or Imp Deft, like whatever one your preference sits on? And the thing is that Imp has had a longer career than Deft, and again, like Deft he's had higher points than Imp, but he's also had much lower lows. And whereas Imp, I think, has actually proven himself that he's at times really been the hard carry for his team. Deft has always been amazing. Like, you give him the least amount of resources out of any AD carry, and he's able to perform more than anyone else given those resources. But I don't think he's ever been truly like the hard carry, the reason why Samsung Blue were amazing. Most of those people would point at Dade, like when the amazing roster swap happened and Blue shot up.
Okay.
Deft, with the most recent season, though, I think is easily on route to move up and become an even better player, higher in the top 10.
Deft is a tricky one because to a degree, since he does have some more defensive aspects, and his style is more like consistency over explosion, even though obviously when you're at this sort of level, you can also be explosive and have crazy games, but they're just not going to be as forced, and to a degree, the game's going to dictate when that happens. It's not like he's just going to choose, like, this game I'm going to go super hard carry no matter what. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, I'd give him the analogy of him being more like the Froggen of AD carries, like very exceptional, very polished, amazing in all these areas, but he also needs like the right team and the team to be in the right frame for him to be like the super hard carry. He's not like the Uzi, Wei Zhao, Imp guy who's just going to brute force the game to a degree.
He's also only recently really shored up a lot of his defective like the fact that he was a terrible laner for such a long time. That's only a recent thing that he's become a really good laner. So need more time on that before he starts moving up and solidifying himself as a more polished player, I think.
Number 18, Loveling. Now, here's an interesting fact about Loveling that I learned recently. So he was originally called Lovelin because he loved his girlfriend Lynn.
Yep.
Then he became called Drog because people mentioned about, his drugs and some history, something there. And then he was called Alan for whatever reasons. No one really knows that one. Maybe he's a big fan of The Flash, Barry Allen. And then he changed his name to Loveling. And so I thought, oh, cool, he's met a girl called Ling. But actually, that's because that's his own name is Ling. So he's actually saying there that he loves himself. Now, that, as you must know, Froskurinn, that immediately endears me to him even more. Like, I already knew before then when he was Alan. One of my favourite moments. I already thought he was a baller-ass support. It was amazing. Then he Shrek'd TSM on Moby Bear Volibear, and I was already in love completely. Then, on top of that, when he just maximum disrespected Faker, I was like, you are a god. You are a fucking god. I love egotistical players. I love that shit. So when I found out that he now loves himself, now he's just, I'm loving him as well, but why is he number 18 of all time?
So normally, before on my initial list, I had Cool on the list. I decided to pull all OMG members off the list because OMG have choked way too many times, but I kept Loveling, and it was a debate between Going and Cool, and I was like, what is the thing that actually makes both these players great that I would even question putting them on a list of greatest players of all time? And it's their jungler. I think this was super evident. Part of the advantages that I got as far as scope, even though I eliminated season 1, is that I had the most recent season to create my list off of. And I think the most recent season for OMG has isolated and underlined that it wasn't the gold resource that was going to be an issue, it was the jungle resource. And not having Loveling, as I like to say, hold Going or hold Cool's dicks to make sure that they perform above and beyond.
See, I like that you've learned that one of the keys to performing in life is having someone holding your dick. Like, if you try to hold your own dick, like, listen, if you're exceptional at it, if you really know your way around a dick, then maybe you can perform to an elite level. But it's better to have someone else hold your dick. That's what we've learned, if anything, from China Talk and Froskurinn's impact on League of Legends. The hold your own dick fallacy, as it were. Fallacy, literally, well, as a pun. I'm better than you, freak. I'm just better than you, mate. Okay, anyway.
Yeah.
Now, you have Expeke, number 19 here. Mm-hmm. I had him number 20. Expeke makes your list.
Yeah, I valued Alex Seish. We already talked about kind of the dynamic and the relationship between Frog and Alex and Expeke and how they were falling over each other. I think Expeke had much lower lows than both Frog and Alex over the history of their career, and not nearly as high of highs. Of course, one of the greatest players of all time that I've ever seen is Expeke's backdoor, so he had to make the list alone for that. I respect him as a legacy player, but he's so far down. As you get down on the list, you'll notice that it's kind of legacy players mixed with some new blood, but the legacy players all have major deficiencies in one of the categories, whether they never were able to accomplish anything, or maybe they didn't perform as well as on the eye test or things like that. And so I thought it was a fair spot for Expeke.
But here's the strangest one of all. 20 is Acorn. Why?
Originally, it was Uzi. But when comparing, like when I just asked myself who is a better player and who is more influential, Uzi or Acorn, I actually gave it to Acorn. So I'm a big fan of LGD. This split just because I'm stupid. I love minion management, like wave management and things like that. And something that I just love about LGD is how proficient they are. And I talk about this over and over. And a big thing about that is Acorn and what he provides for the team. It makes LGD so hard to beat. Even when you have so much of a gold lead, you have to like slug through it just because their minion waves are always pushed forward, that you can never take any objective for free. And then Monty made the statement that Acorn was part of the reason that Samsung Blue were so good, that he helped invent the mature wave management for Samsung Blue. So I started going back and I watched a lot of the Samsung Blue games, and just recognizing that if you're a team that's identifying as being a late game team fighting team, then obviously you need to have superior wave management and control to allow yourself to get to that late game. And starting recognizing Acorn's importance, because everyone always talks about, Dade and Deft and all of that aspect of Blue, and Acorn and Looper were kind of, they're the big tanks. They have some standout games, not amazing, but whatever. So recognizing his influence there, and then recognizing his evolution and his power spike into more of a carry position role, even from a tank meta, and now taking on these more carry champions like Hecarim most recently, like Kennen, like Gnar. So I thought Acorn deserved to be on the list over Uzi.
There are two names that aren't on your list that I want to bring up. So the first one is Piglet. Why no Piglet on the list?
That was what Kelsey asked me as well. Again, the scope is an issue, the fact that I'm not a Korean expert, so I had to go back individually and look at very specific games. And maybe I just didn't get enough exposure to Piglet. I mean, there are games where Piglet does help Faker carry or shows up big when he needs to, but the fact of the matter is he still had the best AD carry of all time on his team, and still then mid laner of all time on his team. But I'm still in this conversation of Piglet versus Uzi, and maybe people will say that's unfair that Piglet has OGN title, that he has the World Championship title, he has, like these amazing achievements behind him.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's a fair argument to be made for Piglet. I just didn't value it, and I probably didn't look close enough at him.
And then there was one more. Let me just... Oh, yeah, the other one. I mean, you also didn't have, like, some that I had. Like, I had...
Messiah.
Whatever, that's the one. The key one is Messiah. Why no Messiah in the top 20? Someone from China, remember? What do you know about Messiah that we don't?
When I was reflecting back and looking at Wei Xiao, because again, I got into a very heated argument with Kelsey about not having Wei Xiao second and putting the Samsung members, because there are a ton of Samsung players on this list, which I think really says something about that organization, or at least how my interpretation of that organization and their importance on League of Legends. Looking back at World Elite, Messiah was good, and he revolutionized a single champion, but I don't think he revolutionized the game or impacted, or was it as important for his team as some of these, like obviously these players for their teams and for their time frames that they played. The fact that Messiah retired when he did, so we got to see his career kind of cut short. So he had his high period, and then they had that very low period that he just immediately retires. So there's also an issue of timeline. There's not a ton to look at from Messiah comparatively to a lot of these other careers who have been around almost twice as long.
Okay. Do you have any final thoughts for the end of the episode? It's been a long one.
It's really, I don't know. No, I don't got anything.